Good evening. I'd like to call this September 14th, 2023 meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Tonight we'll be following the published and posted agenda. First on our agenda this evening is the approval of minutes from April 13th, 2023. Has everyone had a chance to review them?
Yes.
Yes. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the April 13th, 2023 minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. 6 in favor, 1 absent. Moving right along, we have a post for public comment. I'm not seeing anyone in the Zoom room, and there's no one here for public comment, so we'll go right ahead with the appointment of liaison to the Capital Planning Committee. So we do a first meeting this time to make sure we don't miss it. As we know, David, you've been our liaison the last couple of years, Kathy before that. They meet in November. They meet with John as the chair, John Souza as the chair. Yeah, about how many meetings are we running now? About 3?
3, roughly.
Okay. Anyone want to?
I'd be more than glad to continue, but if somebody else wants it, I'm more than willing to.
Looks like it's yours.
All right.
Yay, Dave.
Good luck, John.
That's a great committee.
It is a good committee.
Very well run.
Yeah. All right, moving right along, we'll go right into the fiscal year 2023 budgetary report and certified free cash presentation. And with us this evening, we have Darlene Lucier, our town accountant.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So tonight I'm here, pleased to present the fiscal 23 year end fiscal. We ended the year in a positive note, which was good, as you can see from our free cash certification. And we did have we had a great year this year. I think I just want to point out some of our highlights. Of course, we had our bond rating increased to a AAA. So I'm proud to be part of that team, and with our strong management financial team, with John Souza, our finance director, and Paul Cohen, of course, our town manager. We work really closely together, which is really unique. There's not a lot of towns that have a strong team like that. We all know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we work really well together. I know when I've been talking with other town accountants, they don't have great relationships with maybe their select boards and their town managers and their, you'd be surprised, but town accountants and treasurers don't get along that well. We don't have that here in Chelmsford, so. So that was great that we got, we're now a AAA community, which is great.
Fantastic.
And we seen that reflect in our bond rating and our interest rate for the borrowing that we did for fiscal 24 capital. I mean, we've got a 2.67% interest rate for that. I mean, that's just, that's a lot. That's great.
2.67%.
2.675%.
Yeah, you heard the 2 in the front. Yes,
Right,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes.
2.675%, yeah, so that's wonderful. And we ended the year, and I'll go into those numbers a little bit, with our free cash of $2.8 million. So we'll go through those numbers, so that was good too for the fiscal year end. I'd just like to kind of highlight our revenues and where we are on those. Our local receipts, our largest local receipt is our motor vehicle excise tax. I think I've been saying probably in the last, I feel like it's been doing it for 5 years. Still strong, still strong, still strong. It's still good, but I think we are starting to see a little bit of a slowdown there. We did collect more than we expected for the end of the year. We had a $5.3 million budget. We did bring in $371,000 over that budgeted amount. But if you compare that to the prior fiscal year, that's where I kind of look at my trends. We're only like $9,000. We're from that number. And then we just received, Mr. Souza just sent out what we received for our commitment. What's going to be, we always get an early commitment in September. The big commitment is always in January, but we get a small commitment in September. It's 5.7% lower than a year ago. So I think we're starting to see, and maybe the interest rates may be affecting that. We're just seeing a little slowdown in the market for that, for motor vehicle excise. So we'll kind of continue to watch those trends, but I think we're starting to flatten out on those. Same thing kind of with permitting fees. We're seeing those a little bit of slowdown from the prior fiscal year. We only did a collection of 86.7. Past years, we were always over our collection rate, so we're seeing a little bit of slowdown. We had a 1.59 million, but almost a $1.6 million worth of, as we saw, and we saw a 15% decrease from the prior year. So I think we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown. I think people during the pandemic were spending a lot of time, they were home and they were spending a lot of time with now they're back out. And I think that reflects, the next thing is our meals tax.
Yeah.
And is people are back out to the restaurants. So we're doing well on that. We saw a 12% increase from the prior year, and we were over budget by $155,000 for that. So restaurants are, people are back out feeling comfortable in visiting our restaurants. And we did see an increase in our room tax of almost $155,000 a year, and that was a 10% increase from the prior year. Again, there you got to remember the hotels right now are housing they're housing homeless, so we do have that income coming in, and that's really, I think, the bulk of that revenue coming in. Fees and other department revenue, this is something we normally don't see an increase in, but there's two areas we're seeing. I know everybody's driving around town and they're seeing outside details. You're seeing the police, you're seeing road work being done, whether it's sidewalks, whether it's road work, even with contractors working on our roads. So when you see detour signs, you can't come here, you can't come there. So our outside detail we do it, when you're an outside vendor, we put a fee on that, a 10% fee. Those are up. We're seeing those fees up there. And then when our animal control officer is doing work, we're doing a share with them in Tingsboro, and those fees are up, the fees coming in from Tingsboro. So those are where those are coming in from. Our alcohol licensing, a little bit again, because I think our restaurants are back opening up. We've seen an increase in our alcohol licensing. We've also, what's happened there too is in 2020, there was actually a budget of $100,000. We've decreased that budget in 2021 because of the pandemic. We were actually ran in the red on that year, so we decreased it down to $75K. And with that, revenues are still running over. It's we were only collecting like $50,000 during COVID when everybody was shut down. So we increased those. So it's really just a 3%, not a big jump, but it's just 3% from the prior year. So just a little bit over 13.5 from is expected from this year. The big number is our investment income. We were actually in a negative last year of $46,000. We reported in fiscal 22. In fiscal 23, we actually had a gain of $513,000. And I think we're seeing that it's really due to the increase of the bond market. We've had a much stronger bond market this year. We do have to do mark to market, so every month we really do have to, Mr. Souza's office reports to us actually the actuals for the market that year. So we're, during the pandemic, the market was not doing very well. This year, we just saw a much stronger market. And you'll see that more when I get into the other accounts that have interest to those, how well the interest did on those. The miscellaneous non-recurring also exceeded by $36K. I thought I would just mention that. We have a few things that kind of raise that up a little bit. Is the opioid abatement through the state of Massachusetts. The Department of Revenue requires that money has to go to the general fund. So, and that's what we consider non-recurring funds. Those are not going to be coming all the time. That's there's a set amount that we're going to be getting, so they're non-recurring. And then those, we do move that money that we do collect, but we move that at a town meeting vote. So we kind of you can either use raise and appropriate it, or you can use free cash, depending, because it ends up being part of our free cash to add that. We did have a sale of real estate, a small piece, and then we had some vendor tailings. the finance director will report to me monies that will not be collected that can actually go back to the general fund on the vendor tailing, so those come back. We do that periodically. And again, I commend the tax collection office, Mr. Souza. He does a great job with the collections. You can't get much better than 99% collection rate on that, so that's amazing, and you won't see that in a lot of surrounding communities, that they have such a great collection rate. These are just kind of I just give this a listing just to show you all of the local receipts that we have. I didn't touch on every one of these, but we did well. If we were, the collection rate was pretty much, within the percentage that we like to see for all that. The next one was just the real estate, the state assessments we get, and the other financing sources, which we all vote at town meetings. Those are monies that are used to fund the general fund, and we do that at the town meeting. The budget report for expenditures. I always commend all the department heads. They do a great job managing their budgets. I don't have to beat on them very often at all. And you can see that we encumbered $1.2 million worth of fiscal '23 expenditures. 1.1 million of that is the schools, and they are allowed to do that. They always have, what they do is they pre-buy for the upcoming year, and those invoices don't come in to pay those by the June 30th. So they encumber, because they have to buy for their fall. They do a lot of fall buying. So that's mostly the other small. We just had some small under municipal government and public and municipal facilities had done some year-end work. The invoices didn't come in at the time of June 30th, so those are just, if you think about it, it's just a small percentage of what our budget is. It's way under 1%. And the same thing with our turnbacks. So the departments, all of the departments, again, they do very well managing their budgets, but we did have a turnback of 1.6, just a little over $1 million, 1.061. Again, really small percentage. Like everybody's like, oh, you turned back $1 million, but when you have a $154 million budget, you're looking at less than under a percentage of the turnbacks. And that becomes part of our free cash certification that you'll see when I go through that. The other pieces of it is just all of our state assessments, overlay. We do have your FinCom reserve, things like that, like the FinCom reserve, turn back $3,500, goes back to the general fund, things like that. It's just these are all small little pieces that end up being part of our free cash certification that don't get used, because all of those funds. So this is how we calculate, how myself and the Department of Revenue certifies free cash. We come down to undesignated. We start with an undesignated fund balance for the end of the fiscal year. When we come down to that number, what you need to do is then you need to reserve from that number, and so you have to back out of that number any open receivables for real estate and personal property. Because basically what we're saying is without it's money that is going to be collected, even though that's part of our general fund, the Department of Revenue says that cannot be closed out, that has to be part, you are going to collect that at some point, you need to set that aside. So that goes against the free cash. And then any deficits that you have on the books, it also, you also get hit. Again, I had less than $20,000 of deficits on the books. That's just a small, and there's usually little small amounts that get hit. And then you have to add back your deferred revenue, and then you come back to your free cash. Your deferred revenue is your deferred revenue plus your abatements. So that's how come that looks like it's in a negative if you have abatements on the books. You have to make sure we also have to keep abatements to the side. They can't be closed out, because we need to carry those for anything that the assessors need to close out for abatements, so we have to keep those. So the DOR and myself certified free cash at the 2.887154 is what our free cash got certified. And those sources of, I think there was one before we get to that, there's the sources of revenue of the free cash. again, I talked to you about our returns back to from the departments. We also have encumbrances from the prior year that doesn't actually get used. So there's always like a small balance from encumbrances, which was 40,000. And then our revenue surplus, which was from our government receipts, was $1.5 million, which gives us that, basically, the sources of free cash for the 2.87. What I thought I'd do is, I don't always do this, but I just thought it would be good to like kind of look at all of our enterprise funds, just to show you what they were certified for their free cash, just to, there's a lot of talk about sewer and stormwater and the other, we'll talk about the other enterprise funds, but for sewer, they had got their free cash certified at $898,647, almost 648. We did reserve an expenditure on the books for $261,000. That's actually a pump station that's currently in the works. So it's in the works. The money was already voted, so we need to reserve that I need to reserve that on the balance sheet, because if I don't and close it, they don't have that money to use. It would have to be re-voted at town meeting. We don't want to do that. So it's always a reserve for expenditure there. So, but between their revenue and expenditures, they had almost $55,000 surplus of revenues that got added to their number from the prior year. And that's kind of how that works. So if you're just looking, and it's kind of like doesn't make a lot of sense when you look at the numbers, but this is their revenues. So they actually, when I just said they had a surplus of 54, they actually had a surplus on this side of it. The revenue was 172. But if you look at their expenditure side, they were actually in a deficit of they were actually in a deficit of 175. What happens here is just, this is an accounting, I have to explain this. They had a prior year expenditure, a reserve for expenditure. What happens is I close that expenditure out to their undesignated fund balance, but where they charge it to is to their expenses. It's when I close everything out to their balance sheet. This is kind of like accounting 101. It gets a little tricky, but I can let them spend their expenditures and be in a deficit because they already on their balance sheet from the prior year, they have an expenditure out there sitting there waiting to be expended. So I take that, close that out to their undesignated fund balance, and then close out the difference. And when I do that, so they had a $319,500 reserve for expenditure. I closed that out to their undesignated fund balance. The difference between the two ended up being the $54,000. It's just kind of a mathematical, it's kind of how I have to, and this is the only way you do this is only through the enterprise funds is how you do this. So they have to be able to, I have to reserve it on the balance sheet every year, but the only way that they can expend it is actually through their expenditure. So it looks like they've overexpended their budget, but they really haven't, because there's actually an expenditure waiting to be spent on their balance sheet. And you'll actually, I think you'll see that there might be a couple places. You're going to see a couple of enterprise funds. Stormwater. Again, so if you look, they had a reserve for expenditure from the prior year of $54,000, and we closed that out because they expended it in their account, and then I closed it out at zero, and I ended up closing that to the undesignated fund balance. So the difference between their revenue expenditures and then what they had for reserve from the prior year, they added $44,634 to their undesignated fund balance, bringing their free cash certification $346,813. At the select board meeting on Monday, I know Christine Clancy spoke about how this is why you'll see a lot, and when if you're looking at what things are being for ARPA, a lot of the projects that we're looking at have to do with stormwater. There's just not enough undesignated fund balance or their free cash to do the large projects that need to be done under this without raising these fees. There's no other way to be able to do that. So, and this is this is kind of a prime example, I want to kind of bring this up, that there's only $346,000 in this account that can actually be voted at a town meeting to do any projects. And you'll see that the projects that Christine Clancy brings forward, there's a lot more than that.
How many years has the stormwater enterprise?
It's been 2 years.
It's just 2 years.
Yeah, yeah. And again, you can kind of look at their, like, what their revenues, so there we had a $1.8 million, 1.834, and they came in at 1.846, so they had a surplus of $12,000 in their revenues. With their expenditures, they actually overran it by the 22,000, but they had that 54,000 from the prior year on there, so I closed that out, and if you take all of the difference of that is how you came up with their positive number. Golf course enterprise, we didn't have any projects there. We've done projects for a few years over there and upgrading some of the greens over at the golf course. This year we didn't have anything, so it's all pure revenue. The revenue was $74,028.96. That gets added to their, just right to their undesignated fund balance, to bringing their free cash certification at $331,430.12. So there really isn't. It's pretty clean there. That's just what they had, no expenditures, all just pure revenue. PEG Access, which is our TV cable access station. Pete Padula he's still in the process of upgrading the TV station over in the Parker. He's still working on that. It's been a little bit, it's taking him almost 2 years to do that. Originally, that money was voted 2 years ago. Again, it was a lot of pandemic backlog there. The pieces of equipment that he needed to get, he couldn't get. He's finally wrapping that up. So this year, we still encumbering $73,000, and that's almost spent now. He's really spending down that money and getting that. I think the studio's almost ready to go. But they did well. They run on your fees that are on your Comcast and your Infinity or your Verizon cable bills. You see there's a small fee on there. Those fees are still staying strong. He worries about people streaming, trying to find free ways to stream and get off of all of that. But it's still strong. It's still doing well. So he did well. He actually added $115,718 to his from his undesignated balance from the private year, giving him a certification of $536,000, almost $397. So he's doing well there. He's happy about that. And again, the TV station is going to be hopefully up and running, and he'll have all the equipment that he needs. And he's trying to look at he's actually thinking about other projects, seeing that has a nice free undesignated fund balance. He may be doing other work and upgrading a lot of the areas around here. And then the Forum, we have the ice skating rink. We didn't have any projects there again. This is similar to the golf course. If you remember, a couple of years ago, we needed to get the refrigeration done over there. We had no ice, no one could skate. So that project got completed. This year, we didn't have anything. We just had pure revenue that came in of $100,604. So that just went right to the free cash, to their undesignated, to adding they got certified at $434,379. That's there. So that was just a pure there. I think and again, I would like to just talk about I really want to talk about our balance and stabilization. It's a better number than last year because of last year, just in our earnings and investments, we had a deficit last year of $420,000. This year we had a positive number. It's not huge, but it's a positive number of 193. So I was happy to see that. Again, the market's doing better. We did get hit by that, by $420,000 last year. So we started with we had a town meeting vote to vote, we always vote into the stabilization, so that was a 1,089,000, but then we added 193,628 to the, for the investment. So our ending balance as of June 30th was 13,669,128.96. So we did better than last year. We're glad to see that the market's doing better, because it's definitely helping us. And you're gonna see that next in the OPEB fund. Last year, in this fund, we had a 746,330 net loss in our investment earnings. This year, we had a positive of 1.196, and that, so we know the market's doing better. Prim, we have this invested with the state, with the Prim. They manage it very well. Again, we had the 1.7 million dollar transfer in from at town meeting. So we started at 18,473,000, and the new balance for June 30th is 21,439,002. So we have a strong balance in our OPEB. CPC, because we do have a warrant article on CPC, so I thought it would be good to look at what our CPC account is doing. This is just what our fiscal '23. We did have a commitment of $1.4 million. We had just a small, just under $20,000 worth of abatements that go through, very common. And our revenues was the 1.3. So we just have less than $10,000 to collect there, and that will get collected. That's always transferred over to tax, and it's a lien to tax, so that will get collected. As you can see, we have prior year commitments on there because of those are the years that don't, and they also get collected. You can see we just have a small fiscal '22 amount of less than $100 to be collected there. So those monies always do get collected because they're liened to a tax. So we did have a total collection of $1.9 million, $500,000 or 503 of that is the match that the state gives us, and then we had $14,000 worth of interest income on that. So we did well, just a little under the 2 million mark on CPC. I'd like to look just at the balance sheet, and what's highlighted there in yellow is their undesignated fund balance or their free cash. This isn't certified by the DOR. They do look at it, and they make sure that everything's in balance, but this is kind of what's available for funding for projects for CPC. But you've also got to remember that if CPC goes away, if we don't have CPC any longer, we do need funding to cover any outstanding debt that we have. And I'm going to go through our outstanding debt in a moment, but you always need to have enough money in this fund to be able to cover any of that debt if this does go away, if anytime somebody wants to vote this out. But we do have $3.2 million. I know we do have a warrant article, and I know that it's going to be covered by a borrowing, and I do suggest that that's something that they do. Because it's a smart way to do that. There's enough borrowing capacity, and they look at, when we do CPC, they tape it separately of what our borrowing capacity is on this. We kind of probably, and John would know this, but about 8 years ago, we were really kind of low on this account. We had done a land purchase, and we used all the cash that was in that, and that kind of hurt us a little bit on further borrowing capacity under CPC. So I prefer to see like a borrowing, there's always enough to go ahead and then pay the debt over the course of the years to do that. But the first, can we just go back to just the balance sheet? I just want to like kind of, so you people understand it. So the first, like where it says CPC, and it says like open space, historical, those are the open projects. Those are the projects that are on the books right now. They're open. I have to keep that money set aside. That's all the funding. And then the reserve for expenditures, same thing. Gonna keep that. That has to be set aside. And that's really like all the debt pieces. And then you have your undesignated, which can be go ahead and vote. That can be voted at town meeting. And then the bottom kind of pieces are the 10%. Policy for CPC is we put the 10% in, and then we take the 10% out to pay the debt. And that's, if you've been to town meetings, you see that they just put the 10% in, we'll put $250,000 in, and then we take the $250,000 out to cover any of the debt for those particular open space, historical, and housing projects. So that's how that works. So that's what those pieces are. I just kind of wanted to explain that, because people are like, what are all those little pieces down there? And this is the debt. And where we are, we have debt out to 2031. The Warren Pole project is the last one. But you can see that we do have declining debt. And so with the amount of money that is in CPC, we can take on another project at land purchase and be fine within paying our debt over that course of those years. But I just thought you'd like to see what we will have every year, those fiscal years, we have to fund those debts out of CPC, just to kind of give you a little. And that's really that's all of fiscal '23. If anybody has any questions. We did good, we did fine. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you.
There's going to be a quiz afterwards.
All right.
The other night at Selectmen's, so I got it twice.
Next on our agenda, we have review and discussion of the warrant articles for 2023 Fall Annual Town Meeting. And with us this evening, we have our Town Manager, Paul Cohen, our Finance Director and Treasurer, John Souza, our DPW Director, Christine Clancy, our Town Clerk, Patricia Zeres. We have our Superintendent, Jay Lang. Anyone else hanging out there in the audience?
David Brazel from the library.
David Russell, thank you for being here.
I think Leslie's on the Zoom.
I think Leslie is on the Zoom, yes.
So with that, Mr. Chairman, as a courtesy, we have a 27-article warrant that's been signed and posted by the constable and will be considered on October 16th. I think as a courtesy, what I'd do is go out of order so that we can free some of these people up. So
Sure.
my first one would be to address the library, two articles having to do with it's Articles 14 and 15, the Adams Library masonry repair and the McKay Library masonry repair. And that's why Leslie and David are here this evening. Although I will point out that David is going to be the library's representative to the Capital Planning Committee, so he'll be your colleague. And there you go. So you'll be all set.
So 14 and 15, you said?
Yeah, so we can go to 14 and 15, the Adams Library masonry repair, and the 15, the McKay Library masonry repair. And in fact, what I'll do is I'll actually yield the podium to our Public Works Director, Christine Clancy, who, as facilities, is sort of responsible for overseeing these projects. So I'll ask Christine to come up right now, and we'll be seeing her a lot this evening, because a lot of these projects are Public Works and facilities.
Thank you. So Article 14 is repair for the Adams Library masonry repair. This is for $70,000 from free cash. Next slide, please. And I'll go into detail, and actually the next slide as well, get into some of the details. So there was an FY23 capital request made in the amount of $60,000 to repair the front stairs at the Adams Library, as you see here, and also the north chimney pictured here. We started obtaining quotes, I believe in last year, and the quotes were excessive in the amounts, and we also varying quotes. And these were just quotes. To them, we would have to go out for procurement. So we knew we had to go through through Combi, Central Register. So these were just initial quotes. We had quotes upwards of $200,000 from some people. And so looking at the wide range of quotes that came in, we knew that we needed to have additional funding. So this is to seek the additional $70,000, bringing the overall project to $130,000. And the reasons for the increase, really it's contractor availability, and also just with COVID, the industry inflation. I think part of the $60,000 request that was made in FY23 was maybe based on some funding that was pre-COVID or cost estimating pre-COVID. So this project, we would actually look to procure this fall with a spring start. We did originally think we might procure a part of it with a $60,000, but where we are right now, I think actually we might have some economies of scale to have this all be put together as one project, and also not rush the contractor to have this work done this fall. We might have some more competitive pricing if the work is scheduled later in the spring. And it is weather dependent. Next slide, please. Just to get into a little bit the scope of the work, so the north chimney rebuild is the demo existing north chimney to the roof line. Probably several years back, we did make repairs to the south chimney, and at that time, that's when we realized that we had to make repairs to the north chimney. There were some leaks. The leaks have been repaired, so at least there hasn't been any recent leaking, but it is a needed project. It would be rebuilt to match the existing color and shape, repair, replace flues, install repair flashing at the roof line just to make sure that there's no leaks. And then also, just given the location and the height of this, there's a scaffolding that we would need to, or the contractor would have to mobilize on site. Then for the front of the stairs replacement, we would be demoing the existing stairs. This is the main entrance to the Adams Library, so we also want to maintain accessibility. So we'd be using the ramp, which is, can't quite see in this picture, but it is just to the right of the ramp, so we have access to the library. We would be forming and pouring a new concrete base for the granite, and we're proposing granite. In talking with Leslie Kimball, library director, we had looked at concrete. It's a little more to put granite, but granite will last a long time. So we're looking at putting granite in this location. Still putting a concrete base though. And then we would be putting 15-foot length 6-foot treads, 6 total treads. And then we'd be putting new concrete below and above the stairs as pictured. And the existing railings would probably be put back in place, and if we have to repaint them or finish them, that would be completed as part of this project. Next slide, please. I think so. That's for Article 14.
Any questions? What's the source of the funding for this one, Paul? Free cash?
Free cash.
Okay. Thank you.
And Article 15 is McKay Library mason repair or entrance repair. And this is estimated to be about $30,000. And this is also coming from free cash. Next slide, please. So pictured here is the McKay Public Library. And the front stairs are spalling, deteriorated. So this would actually replace the front entrance. And also, as part of this, and I'll get into the scope, as far as the improved ADA accessibility in the rear of the building. So for the front entrance, we would demo the existing steps in the walkway, install two new granite steps and a concrete base, install also a new walkway. The walkway is concrete and deteriorated. We would also power wash. You can see the porches just need some cleaning, so that would be power washed, repointing some of the voids with concrete, and then repoint the concrete. The railings are in good condition. They just have to be refinished, so we would look to reuse those, and then just loam and reseed the area. This would be the scope for the front of the building. Next slide, please. And so at the rear of the building, we do have this ramp here to provide ADA accessibility. In looking at the ramp, it needs to be updated to really truly meet ADA requirements, and that includes actually lengthening the length of that ramp. So be replacing that ramp in its entirety. Also, the ramp needs to end on a level landing. As you see, it ends at the parking lot, and then it's flat, but it's not level to ADA standards. We would also improve that as part of this project. And then also look to add a push button potentially at the rear of the building just to allow access from someone to get into the building to improve that access.
Is that parking right in front of the, right in front of the ramp, and the other, is that a parking spot, a handicap parking spot? What
The
is?
handicap parking spot is to the left of this. Is over here. We will have to look at this area, because I know that this is used for concerts, and so that's what we want to, we will look at the footprint of this, but the handicap parking spot is over here. So that will stay, that's just for, this is the ramp.
Yeah. And on the library steps, is that deterioration cause any safety issues, or is just cosmetic?
On the
Main
Adams
the
Library.
steps.
I mean, right now, I would say it's there's no tripping hazard, but it has, if you look at it, it has stair treads, it's hard to see in this picture.
Is that mic not working?
Yeah, I've seen them picking you up, they can't hear you.
Yeah, you need to talk
This
louder.
better? So it's hard to see in the picture, but there's some bubbling here, so it's more but I guess there's been patches made to it, and the patches are frequent, so if we, it needs more maintenance, granite should require much less maintenance, we won't have to be patching it. So I wouldn't say there's any hazard right now, it's just, it's something that we really, and it's used so often that, it would be a great, this is the main entrance.
Can you take a minute to walk me through how you come up with your numbers?
So, well, it varies on the project. I would say with this project, we didn't have any, so what I like to do is look at some cost, like historical cost information. So in terms of our horizontal projects, our roadway projects, we have so much cost data. So we can go, and Mass DOT has a whole database, so we can go in and we can really, truly estimate those projects. Also, with some building projects, you look at like dollar per square foot, so that's something we look at. When you get to some of these projects, it's really difficult unless you have some information. So what we did here is we sought quotes. Just like, can you provide a rough quote, just we're trying to estimate this, knowing we still would have to go through the appropriate procurement processes. And that's why the quotes came up so varying, and because it is industry driven, it's hard for us to estimate right now. I mean, I even had another project where it's an electrical scope, and we thought it might be $15,000 to $25,000. The quotes came in $18,000 to $60,000. So if we didn't get that $18,000 quote, it would have been a 50 or so. Right now, it's really hard to estimate. So what we do is we look at. So for building projects, we try to find some historical data, and also look at, and also talk to vendors. There's also there's Blue Book, there's other things. We don't have that information. You can hire for some projects. We'll get into the kitchen. That we have a designer, so they actually hire a cost estimating company. So for the more significant projects, we go through the design process. Something like this, where we're repairing, is we have to develop those numbers based on the data we have, or vendors that provide us information.
Does the town have any centralized buying capability, or is it all decentralized by department?
I would say we would have centralized buying capacity, but we'd have to scope that all out. I guess the thing is also, this is a masonry project, so if we so that's why we are trying to bring some. So I would actually put Article 14 and 15 out as one bid. Maybe not because it's wooden construction in the back of the rear of the building, but we probably would put this all together as one project. Sometimes there's benefits of breaking up into small projects based on availability, but with this being masonry, we probably would put it as one project.
Well, my point, I guess my question is, who makes the final decision, like on this quote? Who says, okay, this is a good number, this is what we're gonna go with?
So when so quoting and estimating is completely different from procuring, because we're held to Chapter 149, Chapter 30, 39M. So what we think might be we put it out to bid. And when we put it out to bid, we're required to go with the lowest responsive bidder. So that's where we sometimes, so if we think also by putting it out this fall for next spring, hopefully people are competitive or hungry for planning the work for next spring. If we put this out right now or in October and said it had to be done by December 1st, you'd be paying a premium price. So you want to hit the market at a good time. I would say with our paving bids, I think hit the market at a really good time. It's the end of the winter. We do it right probably January, and that's where people are just starting to sharpen the pencils and provide bids. So you want to hit the market. Right, we talk with Dr. Lang on when to get the school projects out, and so we want to get a lot of projects out this fall for next spring and summer.
Thanks.
When you do the bid process, is there like you can only do it so far in advance? Is there a time parameter that?
No, we can set it. The thing is, if you do it too far in the future, they can't provide prices. So we set it so their pricing is only valid for 60 days. So the thing is, once we put it on the street, we have to accept the bid. So we have to, I guess, have the funds in place. So we accept the bid, but we can say this can be done next spring, next summer. If we said it had to be done like 2 years from now, that's where they might not feel comfortable providing a price. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's very interesting, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't go anywhere.
That concludes the 2 library projects. We're now going, so that sort of frees up David and Leslie. We're now going to try to free up Dr. Lang and go to the Article 10, which is the Chelmsford High School kitchen renovation, which is the one project for the schools. And again, Christine and Dr. Lang and I and others sort of meet monthly over for the school projects. And this one, and Christine will get into it, is a real intricate project with a cost estimate and so forth. So I'll turn that over.
Thank you. So Article 10 is the Chelmsford High School kitchen renovation. We were before you last year for this project, and we also right now we're currently undergoing the McCarthy kitchen project. So this is a request to for $1.5 million for the reconstruction of the Chelmsford High School kitchen, and this is appropriation. I believe we're borrowing that, correct? Next slide, yeah, thank you. So as I said, so we were before you last year for FY24 capital projects, request for the amount of $641,000. And also last fall, we had asked for additional funding for McCarthy. We knew at that point we would be back asking for more money for the high school kitchen because the cost for the McCarthy kitchen, it's still a large renovation, but smaller project, came in significantly higher. I will, on the next slide, get into some details as to how we arrived at the new dollar figure. Right now we are under contract with JTA to develop design documents. They're working right now through the McCarthy project and working on this project as well, since we already have some funding for this project. This request is for an additional $1.5 million, so the total estimate is $2.1 million. That equates to $500 a square foot, which is within our current industry cost. You can see anything from, I think, $400 up to $800 sometimes. So this brings us in line more so with current industry costs. Next slide, please.
Right there.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So originally, just to clarify the numbers in my head, so originally the estimate that it was going to be how much?
So if I can maybe explain some of it in this slide.
Okay,
next
go ahead.
slide, because we had the 641,355. That was from a 2016 Dore Whittier report, which had done a very broad brush looking at all potential needs across the schools. And so looking at that, since then there's been significant inflation industry costs. So I think that really is the leading factor. Also, at that time that, renovate kitchen, it didn't get into the scope of it. I think what the original intent maybe by that dollar number, 641,000, was to maybe upgrade some of the equipment. What we're really doing is almost like a full gut, and so there's substantially more scope of work. And that scope of work, and that's what we've now been going through with McCarthy, and that's why we were before town meeting last fall to ask for McCarthy. So that was developed. Now that we have our designer on board, we have drawings, scope, very defined scope, and we're going through with the architect JTA, and they're actually hiring a firm that specializes in cost estimating to design it. And that's where we've together we've come up with a $2.1 million.
And is the design people, so is McCarthy finished?
McCarthy is near completion.
Okay, so in the process of McCarthy and the high school, is there any consolidation or savings by it being one big project, or is it?
So we thought about that last summer. This is a substantial project, so we thought about it. Do we try to before we came before you last fall, we thought about, do we ask for both and combine it as one big project? Given the scope of work, we were maybe nervous that was just too much to commit to. And maybe Dr. Lane can also speak to this if he wants to add to it. But as far as this alone, so what we want to do when we talk about procurement, we want to get these drawings out. We're going to procure the equipment. this winter, so that's all ready to go, or fall. And so we want this project to be ready to go the day school gets out, and if there's anything we can do before. So I think by aligning this as a separate project, and now we're putting documents out this fall, we'll be able to hopefully get maybe more competitive, but also make sure we had that a good schedule to start the work.
Now that McCarthy is about to be completed, or what is the final analysis on that? Did you expend all of the money you thought you would? Did it come out on budget, under budget? I mean,
We're still finalizing it. It came there was some change orders, and because we asked for additional funding, so I think some of the change orders were paying through DPW and through the school department. But I would say it's with, it's relatively minor change orders. Look at the whole scope of the project. So I would say over budget, but it's within. Everything that was scope was just some of the details that were discovered during construction, which I think any construction project does have some change orders, or almost always.
I guess I applaud, and I'm all in favor of this, and I applaud everything. It's just clarifying in my mind that this is going to be the accurate price, because that's all I'm saying. Like, so the $600,000 figure was a rough estimate from 7 years ago, and then we got the real estimate, and this is the final number.
So, I mean, we
Right.
do have to procure it, so there's always a chance. I mean, we feel this is a good number, and we should be able to, so we asked for the additional funding from McCarthy, and we were able to move forward the project. We also, and I will get into it a little bit, so the reason similar.
Shane, the mic's not picking you up.
Increase in the construction industry costs, in the scope, electrical, HVAC, plumbing alone amounts to almost $600,000 in estimates. And also the kitchen equipment, we have a really good handle at the cost of the kitchen equipment is, and that's at least 60% above where we were when we installed the Parker in 2021. And we also have the exterior grease oil water separator. We estimate that at $100,000. Also, because this is such a large project, we will be required to hire an OPM, so we'll be going through that process very shortly to help manage the project. But I think as far as what we did in this 2.1, there's some slight contingencies, so that we hope this is a good number.
Okay, great.
I have a question on the increase of scope. The additional items like the flooring replacement and electrical HVAC, was that discovered as part of the redesign process, or this professional design team? Did they require that these things be done, or was it more like, geez, we're ripping everything out, we might as well do these other things?
So I think the 641,000 was, like I said, a very broad brush of, this is, okay, you want to do a kitchen renovation, this is what the approximate dollar value was. There wasn't a written scope. Then we sat down with the school department and said, okay, what are we going to do? Okay, new equipment. And then it's like, well, because the floor is original to the building, 1974, if we're going to come in here, we don't want to come in here. So it's a very close to a full, I don't want to say a full gut, but it's a full renovation.
Okay, thank you.
Christine, first of all, I want to preference my comment by simply saying I know you just kind of inherited a piece of what we're talking about here. You didn't do the original estimate. But as a member of the Capitol, the representative, I'm embarrassed to have a $600 and something thousand proposal become, what, 1.5 million now?
2.1.
2 point. What, doesn't that say our capital process isn't working?
So I will speak to that. I think, so what we have from McCarthy Kitchen and this, we're taking a hard look at all projects moving forward, and it is really hard to estimate it. So what we're now looking is the dollar per square foot costs. I know we have elevator costs coming up in the future. What are elevator costs? And so the way to resolve this too is also bring in design. So also try to do some schematic designs and scoping ahead of the capital planning. So that's something that we're looking to do. And so I think we have a way to resolve this.
Yeah, I want to make sure you know I'm not blaming you in any way. I'm blaming myself. And in a sense, that I think the numbers that come before the capital committee need to be questioned more. Okay? They just do. Okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, just so Christine's not taking all of the blame for that, is
I'm trying not to.
because I clearly remember this project when it came forward, because I've been involved in chairing capital for a long time. And again, the 641, I remember having a conversation and talking. I believe Christine had been Public Works and director and facilities director for probably about 6 to 7 months at that time. Inherited a huge amount, probably the largest amount of ARPA-funded projects that any director has ever inherited. I had a conversation with her and Kathleen Canavan, former facilities manager, before the capital committee, the meeting process started up. And they began looking at some of these, but it's hard. You have to remember, too, I'm not blaming all of this on inflation, but we've, as a society, we've been kind of spoiled since the 1980s, that we've been running 2-3%, maybe a little more per year. Not ever since after 2020, inflation's been double-digit, and construction and certain materials has been sometimes 20, 30, 40. It's just unprecedented increases that we haven't seen in our lifetime. So I want to blame it all on inflation. Then you couple that with the project scope had expanded over time. So that's the two main contributors. Going forward, what we are going to do is, and I've talked with Town Manager Cohen on this, is all departments are going to need to go through the DPW director, facilities director, in developing their estimates. In fact, so if it's the library, senior center, school department already works in collaboration with Christine and her department. But all of those departments are going to have to go through the facilities and DPW directors, so that way the person with the most expertise in that area of construction and renovation is looking at those estimates. So that's something we're going to be focusing more on this year for the next capital cycle.
No, if I can just add a couple of quick things, because I know we're on that group together. I guess I would attribute a lot of this really to, again, this is an increased scope over what we had been envisioning back in 2016. The other thing is, when we did the Durham Whittier study back in 2016, that $650,000 odd number was a cost at that particular point in time. And I don't think at that time, again, this was pre-COVID and construction numbers hadn't gone through the roof, we didn't have a sophisticated accelerator on the project costs year over year to really, that may have actually been closer to, over $1 million or a little over $1 million just as the project itself at the time. But again, when we did get into looking at this kitchen, if this is going to be a pretty significant increase, we also took a look at the number of students at the high school and the flow of the kitchen, how many service lines they actually have to have the kids be able to go through the lunches, kind of quickly and easily and efficiently. So this is a completely redesigned kitchen for the high school. It wouldn't be just purchasing like new equipment and outfitting it in the exact same space that it's in, and that has led to a lot of this kind of price creep. But as others have said as well, we are taking a hard look, and we started last year as well, of actually going out and getting cost estimates or getting budget quotes from random contractors who may be interested or bid a project, just to give us a sense of what the numbers could ultimately come in at. But we do then still have to go through the formal bidding process and go with low bidders and things along those lines. So we can't require someone to bid on a project even though they gave us a quote. That has happened a couple of times. We'll get maybe a local contractor or someone to be able to give us a quote who we think might be able to do a job. For whatever reason, maybe their schedule is full, they don't end up then bidding the project, and you have to go with the next lowest person. And there is quite a discrepancy sometimes when you are going out to bid. But those are just a couple of the contributing factors. But I do want you to know, because again, we've been on that committee together, this is a significantly different scope than was presented at the time back in 2016. And there are costs.
I would highly suggest that you create a slide then that takes you from the 6 to the 2.5 with how much is X, Y, and Z, so one could step through and try to understand
Okay.
how this change. I mean, if it was my business and this was my plan,
Right.
I would require that. Somebody took me from 6 to 2.5.
Right.
Then please, step it up for me and show me,
No, that's a good idea. We could do a crosswalk to kind
yeah,
of show
show me
where it came
where
from.
the increases come.
Sure.
Dave, you're not wrong. There are going to be a lot of questions about the increase at the town meeting.
I'm sorry?
You're not wrong. They're going to be a
Yeah.
lot of
Oh,
questions about the increase at town meeting.
I
Yeah.
would think that would happen, although I was shocked at the last town meeting. Nobody said anything about the increase in the prior one. But,
One's a little different.
And the
you know, I
McCarthy one.
think this one there will be.
Well, and I think also, just to Kathy's point, and I know Christine kind of covered it, but we always do look for economy of scale when we can, and we originally thought about possibly trying to bring these two projects on board. When we did have the company who's doing the same work on both projects, putting the specs together, we pretty quickly realized that the cost was going to be more significant on this particular project. And we also, it was fortunate that we didn't, but we can't afford to have, these are our two biggest kitchens down at the same time. So because McCarthy actually isn't open for the start of school, the high school and the park are actually kind of serving as the commissary to prepare the food that's being brought over to McCarthy. So it's good that we didn't have them both down at the same time. And, you know, we are going to try to get into the high school kitchen earlier, perhaps even before the school year ends, to do a lot of the initial work. But we can't afford for that kitchen to be down. So it's a very tight, 8 to 10 week time frame that we try to hit on these projects. But I just want to mention that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right. Thank you.
All right, and then the last one, we'll take the town clerk's articles out of order so we can allow her to enjoy the rest of her evening. The first one would be Article 19, it's the financial article of a community preservation fund for the vault shelving for the archived records.
Good evening, how are you? Thanks for having me. This is a much easier nut to swallow, $26,875. This is for the lower level town clerk vault where we store all of our permanent historic records. When I first started as clerk, the shelving in that room was not powder-coated steel. They were just industrial shelving, and everything was just kind of placed in there, and I really didn't know what the records were. So over the years, you can see our project timeline from when Honorina started, getting reporting and inventorying and different options that we could look at until today. We've been working on this really since 2013. And it's been a lot of completed projects in that time frame. So what brought me to renovating and adding archival shelving to the town clerk vault is that we finished the restoration of all of the historical commission records that you see there, and those cabinets are not in environmentally controlled spaces. They're in the hallway outside of the building inspector's office. Originally, if you go back to the previous slide, I just want to point out just the lovely condition that they were in. Those records were actually pulled out of a dumpster when we moved from the old town hall to this building. And they are very critical records that the Historical Commission values very much when they're doing a lot of research and when a lot of genealogy, a lot of property valuations over the years, really since 1726 to 1948, those records were stored, again, rescued from a dumpster. They used to be stored downstairs in what we now call SBO3, which was also a nightmare, which is beautifully restored now. But because Linda Prescott needed access to them all the time, she bought those cabinets and she put them in the hallway. They are now, you can move on to the next slide, have been restored through our capital request, through CPC, grant funding, through the New England Document Conservation Center. They've all been digitally recorded. They've all been preserved, rebound if they needed to be, and then put in the archival boxes. So now I'm like, well, it's really a shame to put them back into a muggy, musty hallway cabinet, they really need to get moved into a climate-controlled environment. So my clerk vault, I haven't done much with it since I started as clerk. I did put a few shelves in the very back of it at first just to help organize files, see what we owned, and that was just done out of my operating budget. But at this point, we need shelving that can accommodate those larger volumes and create permanent space that they can just be and be safe and not be handled as much as they were before. It also took me some time to assess my needs of that vault is also used for elections quite a bit. So I store our voted ballots in there. So it's kind of a functioning space as well as an archival space. So I needed to make sure I wasn't taking up all of the floor space. So we just kind of worked out this design with a company that I've used before when we renovated the lower level planning and zoning room. They did this mobile archival shelving for us down there, and it worked out really well, and it just maximizes the space beautifully. These mobile shelves will provide enough space for me to put my voted ballot bins on the bottom shelves, because they're very, very heavy when you start stacking them up on the wall. So it's nice to be able to have the wider bottom shelves to be able to store those bins, and then all of our permanent records would go on the higher shelves. And some of the shelves that I had placed previously in the back, this design doesn't really show it because they exist, but we're going to move those to the side walls. I still have 4 rows of industrial steel shelving on the sides, which, we're still trying to work through getting those records, what are they? Are they permanent? Are they worth spending the money to restore? But we'll move the good shelving I have in the back to the side walls and then use this mobile storage to go back and forth. So for 5 bays, it's $26,875 to do that project. Any questions? Nope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, after she stated, if you go
Sure.
to Article 22, the general bylaw, and then she'll do 23 as well, under the charter.
Okay, and forgive me, I left my,
22 is the posting of the town meeting warrant.
thank you.
Someone forgot my glasses. Uh-oh.
Okay, posting of the town meeting warrant. So when we re-precincted after the census, after the 2022 census, and we had to add 2 precincts and then unfortunately 2 more split precincts, our posting locations never were changed, and they had still a lot of postings at the old precincts in Betty Delaney days where they were being posted in the elementary schools. We don't have any polling locations in the elementary schools, so it really doesn't make sense to post things in the elementary schools. We tried to research going, where's the statute that says where you have to post, and there really isn't anything that spells out where you have to post. So in order to be clear, I wanted to make sure that somewhere in our code we had a way to actually identify where is the appropriate place to post meetings. You want them to be in various places around town, in public places that are accessible to the public. So rather than be very specific, we just thought the police station, all the polling locations, whatever they may be, because they might change over time, the libraries, and the fire stations and the town offices. Well, town offices is one of the polling locations. So by spelling that out kind of broadly, if there are changes made going forward to wherever the fire stations are or wherever the polling locations are, this bylaw would identify where the constable is supposed to post any of our warrants. And that's all there is to that one. Any questions?
No.
Okay. And 23 is the article requesting the reduction in the number of signatures for a town meeting rep to pull papers. And I know it doesn't seem like 25 signatures is a lot, but over the last few years, we've really been struggling trying to get people to pull papers in January to fill those town meeting rep seats. And we've had more and more write-ins. And what I want to try to do is make it easier for people to pull papers so that they can get their name actually written on the ballot and make it just as easy, well, I would say easier than doing a write-in campaign. So right now, there's no incentive having to go out in February, tromping through snow, knocking on doors, getting 25 signatures when you can just get your name on the ballot, and all you need is 10 votes to be able to get on a reserve list. So this kind of balances that out a little bit. So if we can reduce the number of signatures that a town meeting rep needs from 25 to 10, it just makes it easier. I'm hoping we fill those seats, we minimize the number of vacancies, we also minimize the number of write-ins during each election, because I don't think people realize that the write-ins are a tremendous amount of work after the election to contact all those people. You got to find their contact information. You have to actually reach out to them. You have to get their confirmation that they're actually willing to take the seat, that somebody might have written them in by accident. I think, Sam, one year you and Candy both got written in accident, and you're like, we don't want that this time. So it's a lot of work. It's unnecessary work. And so by making it simpler for people to actually pull papers and get their name on the ballot, I just thought this was one way of doing it.
Great idea.
Do we know what other towns, what their limit is for?
I really don't have that data at the moment. It's easy for me to find out if you'd like me to have
Yeah,
that.
if you could.
Absolutely.
Because, the 10 is great. 25 is not a huge hurdle.
It's not. It's just that it's within their precinct, and, when you're running for a townwide seat, you can go to the Winter Farmers Market and you can get signatures. When you're running for a precinct rep seat, you have to go to your neighbors.
Oh, I know,
Yeah.
and I've done it, and
Yeah.
it concerns me that we're going down from 25 to 10, and so you got 10 neighbors, you go to 5 houses and you're done. But your precinct's bigger than 5 houses on your street. So I feel like if you're going to be running for that position, you should have an understanding of what your at least your neighborhood area is and who you're running for. It concerns me that we're even going further down in the amount of people we have to select. So if you could.
I will certainly get
Yeah.
that data. A lot of towns are still open town meeting, so I'll
true.
have to get the representative town meeting and then what their requirements are. I think 25 is pretty standard. And again, what concerns me more are the vacancies. What concerns me more is that it seems like it's too much work for people to even start the process, and that we end up with not enough people on the ballot to fill the seats. That concerns me more, having precincts completely underrepresented. And we struggle before every town meeting to try to fill those vacancies. And like right now, we don't have any. Don't anybody quit between now and October 16th. So it's just something that, I'd like consideration, but I will get you that data.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Has this been a problem for a lot of years, or is it
it's-
COVID-related?
It's been incremental since I've been clerk. It's been getting less and less involvement. COVID actually didn't really hurt us. I think, and we only went up by 3 seats when we changed the precincts. We went from 162 to 165. But even when we were at 162, it's just getting people to pull those papers. It's just getting a little harder. So we make it easy once they're in by just sending in that incumbent letter. It's like, oh, good, well, just get in. What we're going to do is just pull your papers, get your name on the ballot, and get in, and then we'll make it easy for you. But I don't like the fact that lately it's, I'll just do a write-in. And that seems easier for people. And that's not the way. I'd rather have them knock on the 5 doors and at least get 5 neighbors to say, yeah, we'll sign you in, than have somebody, I'll just have 1 or 2 of my friends write me in, and I could win on 2 votes possibly,
I was going to say, my old precinct 4 was so underrepresented. When 2 people wrote me in, I got a phone call. Oh,
Yep.
do you want to be two votes?
I guess I come from an active precinct, because ours always has an extra person that gets voted in.
Yeah,
so.
which is great,
Yeah.
but you don't have that everywhere.
That's true.
Yeah, and then the whole thing about you get the onesies and the twosies. I'm thinking, okay, great, there's 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and it's a failure to elect. And then you go, oh, there's a 2, and I'm like, okay, great. And then you go, oh, there's another 2. Boom, failure to elect again. So you have to have enough votes to be able to even call them and say, hey, you're the top vote getter at 3 votes, yippee, can you please take the position? And then have them say no, or have them say yes and then not show up because they didn't have any level of commitment to it at all. So it might seem like, oh, it's a shame that we have to reduce the effort, but by making it easier for them to actually get their name on the ballot, to me, increases the opportunity to have full representation and not begging people, weeks before town meeting. That's just my opinion, but I will still get you that data. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Okay, we'll now go back to the beginning. That was kind of like a consent agenda. We took our.
There you go.
And now we're back. But, and again, yeah, we'll try to cover these. Again, 27 articles. The first article is reports of town committees. There's no action, as you know, on that article. I've asked our DPW director to provide a report on the opera projects, since they are a significant, even though they haven't been funded by town meeting, it is a significant investment and upgrade to the town facilities, and obviously now moving forward, perhaps some drainage and other infrastructure. So I thought it'd be an appropriate time to provide an update to town meeting. So that's how we'll kick off our reports. As required by our bylaws, and John will provide on behalf of me, the required 5-year financial forecast, moving forward, and then we'll provide just a financial overview of the articles on the warrant for the town meeting. You can see Darlene mentioned earlier, the $2.87 million in free cash. That sort of lays out how the free cash will be allocated at town meeting. If you look at it at the high level, you can see of the $2.89 million, we're putting more than half of it into roadway and sidewalk construction, and just under $950,000 into the stabilization fund. And then we have some of the other minor articles, some of which you've already heard from this evening. Next article is the consent agenda. This is the recommendation that I've discussed with the moderator, John Curlin, in terms of the 27 articles. We can take 11 under a consent agenda because I think they are rather straightforward and really won't take a lot of debate. But again, if anybody objects, they can pull an article out of there. And so that's how that will work. So then we now move into the start of the warrant. And the first one is customary. It's the Cemetery Improvement and Development Fund. This comes from the Cemetery Commission. Obviously, David Boyle, who's our cemetery director, initiates and advances this with the approval of the cemetery commissioner. This time, they're seeking $75,000 from the sale of graves and lots to the Cemetery Improvement Development Fund. And basically, it's two areas of focus. One, at Fairview Cemetery, there's $40,000 to purchase and install a second niche wall, which basically is a growing popularity in terms of a place for cremated remains. And then the second area, the balance of $35,000, is to finish the cemetery expansion project at Pine Ridge by installing wrought iron entrance at the new Riverneck Road entrance to the cemetery, along with paving, loam seating, and hydro seating. So that's what was requested under this article. Again, you've obviously been familiar with in the past with Pine Ridge's expansion and Fairview. Again, the niche wall they have is basically the case now where it needs a second one. Article 3 is the sewer. I take it are there any questions on that? Because if they are, I have a gentleman right here who can answer a lot of cemetery questions.
I'm confused by,
Go ahead.
I guess I'll ask privately. I don't understand what happens at you leave the ashes in a container there? Is that? I mean, I don't want to be graphic, but tell me everything.
It's
So
a
the
permanent
niche-
safety deposit box, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, basically, so the niche wall that you see there, when someone,
Home one.
so when,
You're not in it.
so when someone, if someone has a loss in the family, they would visit the cemetery, meet with David, and they would be selecting this. They almost look like they're little squares. So each one of these is a panel, and then the urns are. Oh, I'm sorry, right now.
I'm moving it for you, sorry.
Each one of those panels can be detached. And so basically, the person is buying a space in there. And I'd have to defer to David on this because I've been away from this field for a long time. But I believe each of those compartments holds urns, for the cremated remains for two persons. So
That's correct.
So it's a nice, it's an attractive feature. And then the David would work with the family to have lettering then done to memorialize the person on the panel. So that's the way those work. And it's an alternative to ground burial, and it also makes better use of space, as you can see.
Nice. Thank you.
Oops.
It's kind of like multifamily housing. As opposed to single-family residence.
It's more like an apartment building.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you intend on charging condo fees?
Yes, you do pay a perpetual care fee, yes. So the next article, Article 3, is the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund. Again, this is a perennial article at Fall Town Meeting. We take the interest earnings from the past year, because when we collect the funds from the project, we don't have a special legislative act in order to keep the interest with the fund. So basically, John, as our finance director, goes and reviews the actual interest earnings on the sewer capital and betterment accounts for the prior fiscal year, and then that amount is then appropriated, because it was always considered as part of the financing schedule for the sewer project. So this past year, the amount was $156,842. Again, you saw, as Darlene explained earlier, because of the increase in interest rates, and we mark to market, the bond investment earnings are higher. And so, again, this doesn't expend the money, it just puts it into that fund, and then as part of our debt service every year at Springtown meeting, when we fund the sewer debt, we go from betterments as well as the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund appropriation. And right now, that fund has $2.8 million in the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund. So again, this is sort of a ministerial housekeeping article, which is why it's put on the consent agenda. Article 4 is funding for collective bargaining agreements. Here, we're seeking appropriation of $1.227 million to fund, which will be the final collective bargaining agreement that was outstanding in the community. This is with the firefighter union for the past fiscal year, the current fiscal year, and then the subsequent fiscal year. So basically, fiscal years 23 to 25. The compensation agreement, and basically, agreement that was ratified by the union and approved by the select board, very much falls in line with how we had settled with our other public safety unions, most comparably the Police Superior Officers Union. Basically, it provides a $1.75 an hour increase in their schedule for the last fiscal year, and 2.5%, and then 2.5% for the current fiscal year, and then 2.5% for the next fiscal year. Similar to the other agreements that you've been presented to you and approved by town meeting in the past, Juneteenth is added as an observed holiday. And then there were a couple, like most contracts, a couple items that are unique. In this case, it was station bidding language that the union wanted for seniority bidding in the event an officer position becomes available. Again, there's no cost to the town, and the fire chief agreed to the request. And then finally, there was an issue about residency. And this basically changes the requirement that exists today in Chelmsford and under civil service, where you'd have to live within 15 miles of the town border within the Commonwealth. And because of housing costs, basically we've adopted what's been already adopted by our comparable communities adjoining, such as Drake and Tewksbury. We now have just gone to a straight 25-mile residency requirement. So again, you can, as long as you're 25 miles, your community is within 25 miles of the border of the town of Chelmsford, i.e. you can go into southern New Hampshire, so that's what this provides. So again, that's the components of this contract, and again, it's been ratified by the union, and it was reached with the assistance of an arbitrator, so it worked out really well. I'm sorry, a mediator, so it worked out really well.
Quick question,
Yes.
just in general,
Yep.
why do we even have like the residency requirement? Like, where did that come, I know you said other towns have it, but it was just kind of.
It was the
curious.
issue of public safety. In other words, if there's a callback, if there's
Got
an
it.
emergency response,
Okay.
you basically would be able to respond in the event there's a catastrophic,
Okay.
situation. So that's the issue. And then again, under civil service, you also had to live within the Commonwealth. And so now what you're seeing is that being waived, and you're also seeing some communities leaving civil service altogether, which is the whole another component. We're not at that point at this point, but we understand that's what's happening in Billerica, and and you're seeing it, and it's already been approved in Tewksbury for new hires that they're moving out of the civil service system. So it's just a change of the times, and I think a lot of it's just driven by economics. Quite
Yeah,
frankly.
to me, it
Yeah,
just, when I
but
read
it's a
that, it just
safety
seemed odd.
It's a
like-
safety response.
Like, you had to be a resident between so many miles. I was like, well, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But now that makes sense with the
And
callback. I
again,
get that.
think of the history, how many decades ago these civil service laws were put in place.
Yeah.
They didn't have today's forecasting and weather and other acknowledged insights. So you could see what would happen if you're in the 1970s. You know, the blizzard of '78. Who saw that coming? Right now, you've got to call everybody in. Well, where are they coming from? We want you within 15 miles. Today, we know, generally, days or weeks in advance, like we're tracking this hurricane right now. They've been following it for a week. And now they know pretty precise, not to say what happened last Friday, nobody saw that one coming, so. But generally, that was the rationale. And also, if you go back that time, there was a major fire in Chelsea that almost burnt the whole city down, and they were calling everybody back to respond for mutual aid back in the time these laws were established.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Article 5, there's no action. That's a placeholder in case we had to make some changes from the operating budget that was approved by town meeting 6 months ago. We now move on to Article 6, which is the statewide opioid settlement abatement fund. Here, the request is for $24,275,000 to be expended by the Board of Health in accordance with the Attorney General's statewide settlement. Basically, we're required under the settlement language to apply these funds for the prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and recovery related to opioids. What we're doing is we're basically appropriating the funds after arrival. So, for example, you may recall a year ago at Fall Town Meeting, we appropriated the initial distribution of almost $140,000 because those were the first settlements, and some of them were lump sum and then paid out over years. What we're doing here is, again, we close out the fiscal year, and I've asked, and we're now into a new fiscal year. And so I went to Finance Director John Souza, who's the treasurer, and said, John, what have you received thus far in opioid settlement amounts? And it's the, $27,000 number that you see, $24,275 number that you see. We're appropriating it to the Board of Health for that purpose. We may come back in the spring if more additional funds are received by then. There is a schedule of distribution under these settlements, but what we're seeing is we're not seeing the funds distributed in lockstep with the settlement schedules, as well as there are new settlements that have come in more recently. For example, the initial ones were with the manufacturers and distributors. The more recent ones were like CVS, Walgreens, and so forth. So we may receive additional funding for the remainder of the year, but at this point, that's the amount. And what happens is when those monies get wired into John, they're segregated in his treasury, because the state hasn't gotten around to allowing for direct appropriation of these monies. As Darlene noted earlier, these funds have to come into the general fund, and then we have to appropriate them. But we don't have discretion because we have to report to the state as part of the settlement claims how the monies are expended. So what we're hoping is the legislature will act upon the requests that have been submitted the last couple of years of saying, can we just treat these funds almost similar to grant monies? So we'll see. We'll see if something happens prior to their recess this November or happens prior to their adjournment of this legislative cycle next July. But until that time, we've got to handle it this way. Okay, so that's Article 6. Article 7. This is a more significant one, David, and we'll take some time on this at town meeting. This is the request to preserve open space, and this is a request to appropriate $4.1639 for the acquisition of Coolest Farm, which is almost 42 acres of land basically spread across 4 parcels. The main parcels are off of Pine Hill Road, and then there were some legacy parcels that were on the other side of 495. And you'll see them spelled out. And I'm trying to provide this the best I can, and this will be funded by community preservation. So parcel 1 is your main parcel, the 25.2 acres, and I have some photos coming up. So that's the main parcel. That's where you see the residential dwelling and area. Across the street is 6.5 acres of frontage lots, where you get 5 frontage lots in. And then across the highway, you see number 3, is 3.55 acres. That's pretty wet. And that's really not buildable. It has no frontage. It's wet. It's really a nominal parcel. And then parcel 4 is 6.66 acres, which has some frontage there off along Hunt Road and adjoining to the adjoining parcel there. So the actual purchase price is 4.113.9, and then we add $50,000 to that for legal, other related transaction costs. This will be a little bit of history of this. Coolest Farm, if you go to the historic books of the town, was the Otis Adams Farm. It was obviously transitioned over the years, became Coolest Farm. This is what you see today when you ride by, and most notably you see the advertisement for sale on the property there for the parcel of land. That's the main area. As you look at it from the roadway, there's a picture of the fields that are part of that property. It was more, I understand, more of a dairy farm than chickens and so forth than you would. It's not as opposed to a flat agricultural farm. And then this is the 6.5 acres across the street. You can see in the back there, that's 495. As I said, that's behind it. And then you can see there's 6.5 acres. You see the advertisement there for sale, solicitation for sale. And then if you go across the highway, you see the green is the wet parcel, 3.55 acres, and then the one next to it, as I noted, is 6.66 acres.
So this is the land in its entirety?
This is the land in the entirety. It started out as 3 parcels, and then as it moved through let me sort of, and I'll get into this in some detail. Unlike Warren Poll, where the family approached the town and worked cooperatively with the town to preserve it in the family's interest, this was the estate, of which they had to bring in a court facilitator to resolve the sale of the property. And basically what it came down to was they wanted the highest economic return out of the property. So what the next slide shows is we had an appraisal done, and then the appraisal was completed back on April 1st. And then the next slide, as you can see, is what the appraisal showed for the the land valuable parcels. There is 18 parcels of a subdivision, which would basically be 18 single-family homes. That's the highest and best use of the parcel. The reason for that is that would be 18 probably 4-bedroom homes with septic systems, because of the sewer capacity and the fact that we're at 40B. That ended up being the highest value for the property, because you would either have to put in a package treatment plant, or and since we're at 40B, you didn't have the inherent right to do a comprehensive permit. The other side of the street, even though it's lesser, and you can see it, there's 5 frontage lots. Those you're banging those out basically at $300,000 a parcel in today's market.
Right.
And those you don't, they're called approval not required. They're basically by right. They just submit a plan to the planning board. They slice them up, and you can market those really quickly. So, and again, so obviously we paid a professional appraiser to get that valuation. But the next slide will sort of give you the background of the story. A year ago, our community development director, Evan Blansky, was contacted in his office by a broker from Colliers International and the court-appointed partition commissioner regarding the sale of the Coolest Farm property. So basically what's going on here is the heirs can't agree and therefore the court takes jurisdiction. And what's happening here is you've got a lot of parties at the table. In this case, I believe there are about a half dozen, each represented by counsel and so forth. And again, from the town's perspective, when they approached Evan a year ago, they basically come in and said, hey, what can you tell me? What's the zoning out there on this development of land? They didn't come to Evan's office saying, will the town buy this land? It was more, hey, we need to understand the town zoning, we need to understand the market and so forth. Evan clued me in as to, hey, Paul, something's going on with Coolest Farm. Unfortunately, the town was not in chapter land, and many of you hear about chapter land where the town has a right of first refusal because the property owner puts it under either forestry use, agricultural use, or recreational in order to get property tax relief during the ownership of the property. That was not the case here, which meant the town had no right of first refusal. So basically, they didn't have to deal with us, and in fact, they went to market without us. They originally had what they call a marketed call for offers in January, and that's where it stood. Nothing came of it because they really did a poor job. It was almost, of research, marketing, and so forth. So they then issued a second call for offers in May, and that's when the town engaged. I had notified the select board that, this property was under consideration, but more following that, went to the Community Preservation Committee and the Conservation Commission saying, does this parcel have interest to the town? Because we know this parcel is going to be sold. And we know that it's going to be sold for an economic development, meaning benefit, meaning residential construction. And so the concern is that at the time, their concept plan showed 21 lots on the 22-acre parcel. Again, it was this conceptual plan and the 5 A&R lots across the street.
But across the street, it backs up onto 495.
But there's a dwelling next to it. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a home next to it. If you come past Weston Nurseries,
Yeah.
you've got that. Then you've got the home that's there, and then it's there. So yes, I think there's a diminishment because 495 is behind them. But as we know, in East Chelmsford, 495 does
My
not
house,
prevent
right,
development.
195 in front of my house.
Does not prevent development. And I think that's been evident by the development we just saw recently off of, out in East Chelmsford. And so when you're looking at it, so there's two things. This is one of the few remaining large parcels that the town has for open space and preservation. And the other impact is going to be, well, if you put 20 plus 23, whatever number of housing units there, 4 bedrooms, you're obviously going to have an impact in the school system because the market that we see is when people purchase and occupy $1 million 4-bedroom homes, you're probably going to have a child or two per residence. So the response back from the chair of the Conservation Commission was, this has significant conservation value. Linda Prescott convened the Community Preservation Committee as the chair. Again, I'm speaking on behalf of the commission at her direction again this evening. As you know, Linda does not like this type of format. And the committee unanimously authorized the funding to do the appraisal. We obtained the appraisal report. During that appraisal report, it wasn't just, let's just go with it. The appraiser knocked down 3 of the lots, and we actually brought in public works assistance, and at the end of the day, we actually brought in an outside engineering consultant to look at the availability of this because there are topographic issues, there are soil maps, everything else. The bottom line is the appraiser felt that the number of lots that you could build on the main parcel, really was more like 18 rather than 21. And that has a significant value. I mean, 3 house lots, if they're valued at $300,000 apiece, that's almost $1 million. And so we submitted a proposal along with others on the common application deadline. And then, without exaggeration, it took 2 months before we were approached back to sign a purchase and sale agreement. Because what happens is the partition commissioner has to go back to the judge who's handling the case, receiving the input from the various parties in terms of how they want to proceed. And then that's how the fourth parcel came into equation is, well, we've got this other parcel out here, and he amended the filing to add that fourth parcel. And I said, well, look, it's a nominal thing, but, we're just going to deal with it in terms of the assessed value. We're not revising appraisals, we're not doing anything more. Went back to the Community Preservation Committee, they agreed to take on the fourth parcel. And that's basically what brings us to where we are today with this property. So then the question becomes, okay, what do we do with the property? At this point, it's been a year, obviously, since the property went originally to put into play, and it's been since January since it's been in market, and it's really been since May that we've been working to secure a purchase and sale agreement, which has now been approved by the court and approved by the Community Preservation Committee, and I'm authorized to act on, by the Select Board's authority to move forward with this. So the question becomes, well, what's going to become of the property? And I think what we'll do, and what I'm proposing, and what the Preservation Committee supports, is similar to what we did with Warren Poll. We'll form a resident committee to receive community input and develop a plan for the use of the open space land. In this case, it's a little more challenging than Warren Poll for a couple of reasons. One is you don't have the active family input in terms of the future, which was very predominant and significant with Warren Poll. I mean, the Warren Poll family had preferences, and we sought to honor those and work cooperatively with them. Here, there isn't that constraint, but here it's not one parcel. You've got the one side of the street where the main parcel is with the subdivision. Then you've got the 5 frontage lots on the other side. The third and fourth parcel, the third one is wet. There's really no development value. The fourth one, again, won't be developed either because there are some wetlands on most of that property that'll be preserved, and it actually does provide a corridor. So the big questions are going to be off of Pine Hill, either side of the road. What does the town wish to do? And I think the best way to do that is form a citizen committee, receive input from the neighbors, from the community as a whole, and then you'll see the subsequent articles to allow sort of that process to unfold. But before we do that, we've got to secure and obtain the parcel. And so that's sort of where we are with this process. So again, the town has a choice. As Darlene noted, we have the capability to acquire the property. It would be borrowed. It'd be borrowed over a 15-year period. If you're, John has obtained an estimate as finance director from our financiers, given current market interest rates. You're probably talking about $435,000 in debt service the first year in FY25, and then that diminishes over time because remember we pay level principal, and then the interest goes down over time. But that still leaves us the ability to act on whatever community preservation needs are in the future, whether they're housing, more open space, or historic preservation. So the opportunity here is, does the town wish to preserve this? Because in the absence of it, it will be sold for development. I do know that there were other developers in the second round of the call for offers. So that's the choice that the town has. So I'll stop there if you have any questions or anything I can answer.
I just think it's incredibly lucky that we have the chance to purchase it because I think it's great. I'm very happy we're in the position to be able to purchase it.
Do they currently pay taxes?
Yeah, everything's paid up to date. Everything is paid up to date.
How much revenue do we lose per year by doing this?
The tax revenue, I can check, I don't have enough time. It's not assessed at, I can tell you, it's not assessed at $4 million. No, and the reason, because, that's a good question. I will get the current assessment.
It looks like there's only one structure on parcel.
There's only one structure.
Yeah.
It's a dwelling. My guess is it'll be raised. In speaking with Linda Prescott who is tied to the historical commission, there really is not a lot of historical value to the, to that dwelling.
Thank you.
And so I don't anticipate that, and that's,
Well, are there like little, I don't want to say sheds in that property? I think there's some little,
there's some little outbuildings that are deteriorated. Fred Merriam has taken some photos out there. There's also some leftover vehicles, if you've been out there. So that's why we need the next article to do sort of the preparation for the site, because there is some cleanup that has to go on out there. And you can kind of see a little bit if you look in the fields. And unfortunately, most of that metal is probably worth something in terms of for scrap.
metal
But there are
scrappers.
some old vehicles. There is an outbuilding, as you said, that's deteriorated out there, and so it will involve some work out there.
Do we know if there's any contamination on the site? Have we gotten that far yet?
We're not aware of any contamination on the site. I mean, it was an active farm.
Yeah, right.
We're not aware of any activity out there. And again, we're using it for open space purposes, so we wouldn't as though we'd be disturbing anything out there. Okay.
So the 40, how many acres is it?
About 42 acres.
42 acres. So that must add quite a bit to our total open space count.
Yeah, we have over 1,000 acres in open space in the community, probably close to 1,100 now, and this is significant. And it will add. Yeah, it will add. I've looked at. In fact, we just obtained a grant of $30,000 to update our open space and recreation plan. I went through the plan, the most recent iteration of the plan, and there are very few parcels of this size left in the community.
Yeah, that's great.
And so this is, and I know we said that with Warren Poll, but I mean, it really is. There are very few that are out there. Lupien's is probably the other one, another one that's out there, and then there are a few other privately owned. But that's pretty much it in terms of build out.
That's great.
The question was, I think, raised that what are we losing in terms of tax revenue as the land now sits? But I think what we have to remember is if the property is developed for residential, you're going to have a significant cost impact to the town. And if you look at most studies that are done on cost versus revenue relative to various types of development, I think if you assume housing, as the town manager has outlined, and family residence, I think the cost impact for putting children in the schools and servicing those properties and so forth will more than outweigh whatever the current tax we get on the land as it now sits. So I think it's probably, from that standpoint, at least in the near term, a more cost-effective thing on a net basis for the town.
Yeah, I've just pulled it up. The large parcel, the 25-acre parcel, the assessed value is $703,300.
Wow.
And then the other parcel across the street, the 5 frontage lots, that's $390,000. So basically, you're at 1.1, probably 1.2, because the other ones are like 40,000. So basically, $1.2 million of valuation. So the taxes on that are what, 20,000 maybe?
Right.
About that. That's it for a year. So again, it's not going to take much off of. In fact, it doesn't take anything off of the tax rolls, because that valuation then gets absorbed into the rest, the remaining of the tax levy. So
that's absolutely true. But my point is that if a developer comes in and buys the property and puts houses on there, we're going to get significantly more tax revenue for the residential, but there's going to be a cost to the town to service those properties, school children, et cetera, et cetera. And most studies that you see today that analyze that kind of thing will tell you that it's more costly to the town
if it's
to do that.
It's a net loss.
You have a net loss, okay? So I don't,
That's a good answer.
I think that's really what you're concerned about.
Not to mention, the street would have to be, that would have to be totally changed, because that's a very,
we get concerns currently. We get concerns currently because of the traffic and the width of the
I mean,
roadway
I
out there.
drive well, used to drive down that way all the time. So it's very, you can't drink your cup of coffee while you're doing it.
No.
And then again, in terms of the valuation, again, we go to an outside professional appraiser to do that, because we're constrained by that by law. And then we basically submitted our appraisal afterwards and said, here's, because, again, the fact that it took 2 months to get to a purchase and sale agreement tells me that, this was a bit of a challenge on the other end, and I'm not party to that, but.
For our practitioner, actually, that's pretty quick.
Yeah.
And the difference between the assessed and the appraisal is highest and best use, is what the market is saying, versus as it sits now, is how we have to assess it in terms of the current market as the property sits now.
And if it's costing us close to 18 to 20,000 per
Right.
school child, never mind the space issue, that's just.
Exactly, that's my point, right.
Okay. So that's Article 7. Article 8 is basically, as I said, if the town were to approve Article 7, and that's a 2/3 vote, then Article 8 basically would be providing $50,000 to, do the planning and preparation for the use of the property, again, with a citizen committee, to, again, develop the plan, but also prepare the property, because as Kathy noted, there's some work out there. Because the property's been neglected basically for years, and like I said, there's debris. I mean, I'm not, old vehicles and so forth, and farm equipment that just has to, get mobilized off-site. And then, again, if you're going to do parking improvements and other stuff, we want to get something, at least get them started. So that's what Article 8 is, and again, that would come from the Community Preservation Fund General Reserve.
There may be money there.
Okay, so that's Coolest Farm. Article 9 is a less significant acquisition. This is $33,500. This is similar to what we did at the last town meeting. This is a parcel of land that adjoins existing conservation land, in this case, the Cranberry Bog. It's located off of Elm Street. I've tried to show with that pin on the map to show you obviously where the Cranberry Bog is with Hard Pond and so forth. And then the next map so that it brings you up a little bit closer. And the reason for that is there really is no access to the bog on that side via Elm Street. And so this would provide that form of access to the bog in that area. Again, it's of land to adjoin and expand the corridor. You can see it's not shown as wetland. And my concern on this is that there's no structure to the left of that parcel. And so my concern would be is, you'd hate to see it, go to a developed use. I will, in full disclosure, and it was disclosed at a select board meeting, this parcel is owned by select board member Pat Wojcik and her sister Marie, so I want to issue that out there. She's not had any involvement. I have, I don't have a purchase and sale with Pat or anything like that. I've not, all I said to Pat was, because she originally approached the Water District on this, because the Water District owns a parcel over there, and they were seeking to look for water exploration. They've since have abandoned that idea. And so basically what I said is I can bring it to town meeting, similar to the one that we did last town meeting for the assessed valuation of that site. So that's what we have here. It's, again, 1.15 acres of land for that corridor. Okay, if there's no further questions on that, Article 10 we've already completed, so we can now go to Article 11. And we're now into the roadway and sidewalk construction, so we're going to bring back our Public Works Director, Christine Clancy, because she has become incredibly popular within the last year or so because it's in all seriousness, the amount, we've gotten nothing but praise for the amount of work that's gone on in improvement of the roads. In the last year or so, even with the difficult weather challenges this year, they'll be working another month. As you know, we've at the direction and guidance of the select board, we're seeking to improve our roadway infrastructure, because it is the biggest complaint and concern that we hear from residents. And so we're again coming back for another $1.5 million to add to our Chapter 90 funds, as well as the money we put into the capital plan, because we do have an extensive list of road investments and sidewalk investments that are needed. And so I'm going to turn it over to Christine, who can, go through the detail of this request and how the funds would be used in a general sense.
Thank you. So the Article 11 is the request to take from free cash $1.5 million to fund roadway and sidewalk construction. Next slide, please. So as you're aware, Chapter 90, we've been level funded for the past 11 years, in that we receive about $1.1 million. We are looking to have an additional $500,000 this year from Chapter 90, which is great, as part of the Fair Share Amendment Millionaires Tax. We have a significant backlog of both paving and sidewalk, so all that money goes to both paving and sidewalk. We just recently, this past year, completed a sidewalk master plan update. So we have of existing infrastructure. We have a $22 million backlog, and then looking at building out new sidewalk, we have a $14 million backlog. So just in terms of sidewalks, and then roadway, we're looking at well over $40 million in backlog, between pavement reclamation, mill and overlay, and then some other preventative maintenance. So this would significantly, as far as, next slide, please. So we have 187 miles of roadway. We do annually update. So now that we have the sidewalk master plan database and the pavement master plan database, really those should work together. And that's what we are doing as we build and update the plan annually. So just this past year, we've had a significant amount of paving, 12 miles of roadway paving, about $5.2 million worth of work. This upcoming year, based on the Chapter 90 funding and the annual, typically we annually between roadway and sidewalk, $750,000. For paving, we were looking at doing $1.6 million worth of work. With this $1.5 million, we really do need to, so next slide, please. We would revisit the published list. So this was presented earlier this year, a 2024 paving list. As you can see, here's a list of the 4.1 miles, 1.67, and we have a 2025 paving list, 6.9 miles, 1.85. What we do at the end of this year, we look at these two lists. We also look to see if there's any other needs, and we'll be combining that with our sidewalk project. And we'll republish this list in next year's list based on this additional funding that would be completed this winter. I think like an example is Old Westford Road. We just recently paved a portion of Old Westford Road, and there's a section that remains that is in poor condition. We do patch it frequently, and it has been it's been brought to my attention. People have called into DPW, and it is something that is currently on the 2025 paving list. The reason was because we know we want to extend the sidewalk in that area, add new sidewalk. Now that we have the sidewalk master plan, that really fits into our sidewalk master plan. So we're looking to see if we can move that up to next year. So that's an example where we might be able to move with this additional funding some projects forward, and combining that with some new sidewalk replacement. Parkhurst is another street where that's been on our paving list, but also we want to add in some sidewalk there.
Well, if you do that, I'll have nothing to complain about.
All right. It's been, I drive over it too, and it's actually the other day, my daughter, we were driving it, she said, why is this part of the road so bumpy? And I was like, yeah, it's on our list.
Just remember when you say from the Rotary to Arbutus, it's the second Arbutus, not the
Yes,
first.
yes.
Because Arbutus just does a U.
Yes.
And you won't fix the area in front of my house.
So, but that section, there's a section that does need new sidewalk, and so we would incorporate, that's the plan, but we do need to look at that if we think we can move that forward for next year. So we're hopeful, but that's why I didn't want to publish a list right now on how we would spend the $1.5 million, but our plan would be to update this list and publish it this winter. Any questions on this article?
The only thing I have to say is that there's so much need in the town that I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
I really do.
Yeah, we did our micro sealing pilot this year. That went well. We're doing so much paving. The state is doing a lot of paving, so it's great to see all this work being completed. Thank you.
We're going to ask Christine to hang around for the next article, because this now goes into the sewer infiltration and inflow. And here we're seeking $100,000 to address infiltration and inflow. We know this is a problem. If you caught last Monday night's select board meeting, we sort of had the polar extremes in terms of sewer flow. Last summer, we had a drought, as you know, and we had a very dry August. This summer, this August, was the opposite. It never stopped raining. The town sewer flow was up 55% from this August to last August. And we know that can't be explained by, consumer usage or business
not.
usage.
Mother-in-law
Sewer
coming to
flow.
visit.
And so Christine has really been leading an effort, and she can go into it, from pilot plans to you get the inflow and infiltration. We had a consultant from Weston Sampson present to the select board the investigation they've done, and in the main initial area and cost-effective area is manholes, and so I'm going to let Christine sort of explain this article.
Thank you. So Article 12 is to transfer $100,000 from the Sewer Enterprise Fund to correct, remedy, repair, prevent, prohibit all forms of infiltration and inflow. So really what this is, so in the analysis that was completed by our consultant, Weston Sampson, next slide, please. Thank you. They did a detailed investigation, and our system is fairly new, so we really shouldn't have that much infiltration, at least in the pipes. We found more infiltration in the manholes. And so the proposal is to rehabilitate 200 manholes. So manholes, typically, that's where you can have some leakage occurring, where between the joints or where some of the holes weren't parged properly. So we do that's an area where we can look. We have created a sewer credit policy, so we had the sewer moratorium, and then from the sewer moratorium, we had to develop a way where we could still allow for some development. So we created this sewer credit policy that allows, especially commercial businesses, to purchase inflow. Basically, they purchase their capacity, and the only way we can purchase capacity is if we have capacity to give them. And so that really would be coming from infiltration or inflow. Infiltration comes from the system. Inflow would be something that would come from like a sump pump or a roof leader that would be going to the system. So this is one of the projects where we can identify taking out infiltration out of the system, the manholes, and it's about 20,000 gallons per day. So that will at least provide that, that provides enough to allow for some growth. We're getting different proposals from different, whether it be a restaurant and the brewery, there's different calculations and how the usage they need, but they could draw from this amount if they didn't have that capacity. And then we're also doing other outreach. Looking at, we have a sump pump investigations program where if you have a sump pump connected to a sewer lateral, that is not allowed. What we're trying to do is provide a way where we can provide a service to separate that and remove it from the sewer lateral and then put it to a sewer system, or maybe if there's an opportunity to have that recharge locally. So we do have that pilot program out right now, hoping people do hear more about it. We've been advertising it at DPW. And then beyond that, we will continue to look for inflow sources. I know that actually Tuesday I'm going to Lowell to see that they're doing smoke testing. They smoke from the street and see where it comes out in the houses. That is a little more aggressive, but it is something that communities are doing because we really do need to find that the inflow, because it's evident from the numbers. So, like I said, going from 1 inch of rain last August in a drought to we had 11 inches of rain this August, and seeing the flows go from 59 million gallons a month to 92 million gallons a month. Wow. That has to be related to infiltration, and because our pipes are fairly new, relative, in speaking terms, especially in New England, it's likely inflow. And groundwater's high, so my guess is some pumps are running very frequently, and just in terms of some pumps, if they're running continuously, that could be 7,000 gallons a day, so it could be significant depending on how often they're running. And so this project, we would design it, bid it, and then we would put it out for construction later next year.
So this is only for the 200 manholes that have been identified for infiltration and flow?
Yes, we're continuing to look at for additional manholes. So that's the thing is we review our monthly data. If we see anything that seems to spike, then we will look to see. So we actually, outside of these 200 manholes, we saw a spike in another area, and we started popping manholes, and we found another manhole we were able to rehabilitate. But we've identified 200 in this area that we'll target first, but continue to look for other sources too.
How are you going to seek out people that have sump pumps?
So right now, we've asking people to come forward. There's other ways to do it when you do building, whenever if you have a plumbing permit, we could go in, we're required to look at your plumbing, so that's one reason to go in there. And then smoke testing. So smoke testing is if you have a sump pump connected to the system, we would likely be able to smoke test and identify you as a connection that we would investigate.
And those connections are illicit?
Those connections are not allowed, yes.
Yeah. And so so this pilot program is really providing a stay on any repercussions.
Right, so the pilot program is we're working with a consultant to identify solutions and potentially provide you with a storm drain lateral to connect right into, and that's something that we want to provide at a no cost, because it's so important for us to get this inflow from the system. This is part of our solution. I don't want short-term, mid-term, and for our sewer capacity, is if we can take inflow out of the system, or infiltration, then that capacity can be redirected for other growth opportunities.
So how long will that program last before it starts being a cost for people?
Well, so right now, we're saying the pilot program is really to the end of this calendar year. And then we're going to start we are already looking at smoke testing for next year. So we're advertising the end of this calendar year to participate in the program or sign up.
How does the smoke test work?
So it's very coordinated with police and fire, and very well residents have to be very, very well notified, because we basically smoke from the street, and it goes if you have no connections that would be illicit or no loose connections, then you shouldn't have smoke coming in your house. You should have it just go right through the stack. If you have an illicit connection, you will have smoke in your house, and it's non-toxic, harmless. But think about pets or elderly. There's reasons why it can be aggressive, or I don't want to say aggressive, maybe not the right word, but it is a different way of finding it.
You're smoking out the illicit connections. That's not, quite literally.
So they've been doing this in other, no. I mean, we smoke from the street, so we don't have to get into your house. We can see it from the street. We just have to.
So just pulling down the shades and closing the blinds, that's not gonna.
We'll see, no, and so.
Okay, all right.
You can see them coming running out of the house.
And fires notify, so it's a very, very all hands on deck process, but it's actually, DEP's requiring us to do it, really. And so Lowell's doing it. So Tuesday, myself and the town engineer, and actually fire is very interested in it well. So Chief Ryan, we're all going to watch the process to see, because they're doing it in Lowell. Tewksbury's done it. Drake, all communities are starting to do it, because it's so important to find those connections. Because these capacity issues are not just Chelmsford. There's regional capacity issues.
So how many people have actually contacted you regarding that pilot program?
We've only had 5 people sign up. So I guess if you know of anyone with a sump pump connected to a sewer, now's your time to sign up.
And if they don't sign up and then they are smoked out, what are the repercussions?
We haven't gotten there yet, but it is illicit to have that connection. So in the future, we would potentially require you to separate it at your cost, and it can be costly to do so.
So what you're saying is it's in everyone's best interest to sign up for this pilot program before it runs out?
Yes. Yes. So,
Point well taken.
Yes.
I really want to see the smoke up, though.
It would be, I'd
I
love to
really
watch that,
kind
yeah.
of need to make.
Yeah, can you let me know when that happens in town? Because I want to make sure I'm around. I just want to sit in my neighborhood and see
I was
it.
gonna say, it's gonna be a great ride home.
And again, it's important to point out, this funding is just for the design and bidding for this project.
Mm-hmm.
I just want, because if we need to come back for future, that'll be if they actually do the manholes. And again, the funding source of this is from as Darlene explained, the Sewer Enterprise Fund is separate account. It has its own free cash of about $900,000. So that's where this funding source will come from. So,
Should maybe do a little video clip of the smoke coming out of the houses in Lowell. Say, this could be you.
That's right. What is it happening in Lowell?
Well, in all honesty, though, but at town meeting, it might be good to, in the reports, to show a clip of that and to tell people, hey, we've got a pilot program through the end of the year. If you sign up, this won't happen to you.
That would be really good.
But if you don't,
let's get everybody in a good mood to start town meeting.
Oh, my God.
Moving along.
Article 13.
All right, Article 13 is a request, and again, you saw this in previous town meetings, and it really is a recurring cost, and as was noted by Select Board Member Virginia Timmons, this is a recurring cost for the town. And because we looked at various funding sources, and we really think this belongs under the levy of the town, and reflecting upon the discussion on Monday night. So we're seeking to raise and appropriate $425,000 for the upcoming fiscal year's cost to remediate PFAS in the soil and groundwater at the former DPW yard at Richardson Road. You're all familiar with PFAS at this point in time. The monitoring well system has been installed. We receive quarterly reports on the sampling. It is going positively. I think that's fit, but we're not there yet. It has an indefinite future at this point in time. But it's our first sort of formal assessment period with the state, so we know we have to do some tweaks to it. In order to protect the wells of the water district. And again, this is under the direction of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, and we need to, basically we pump, treat it, and then re-inject the water down into the soils. It'd be interesting to see how the sampling goes this year, because my gosh, if talking about groundwater flow, it's going to be interesting to see. We've never had this level of groundwater flow. Again, the opposite of last summer when we had hardly any flow, we were running the system. It's going to be interesting to see what the impacts are of this. But again, in PFAS, you're talking about drops in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So it's going to be interesting to see. Christine Clancy, our Public Works Director, has sort of been handling the procurement and bidding on this, and what you see in the sheet, and she can just go over it, we work with our consultant to go over the budget on this project.
Thank you. So maybe if I'm just taking the slide, we can start. Next one. Yes, perfect. So this is a proposal from our consultant, Weston and Sampson. So they've been leading the remediation of this site, and they said it has been going in a positive direction. But next year we are required to do some additional sampling, where we actually have to drill two new wells all the way into bedrock and do some hydrogeologic survey of those two borings. So as you can see, this task 1 through 9 amounts to $425,000. Of that $425,000 to really maintain this remediation system is about $175,000 is for this DEP required new exploration, and it's we knew going into year 3 that we would have this jump in cost. Beyond this year, cost should go back down. So it should be less, $175,000 less than what you see here. So this involves the inspections, the reporting. So we're doing reporting frequently to DEP, quarterly groundwater sampling and reporting. There's also repairs sometimes to the system modifications. We also media changeout, which is about $70,000. And then again, additional reporting and sampling. Task 2 is the Phase 2 CSA investigation reporting. That combined with the sampling amounts to the $175,000. Any questions?
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. So again, we'd have the two McKay articles. We then go on to strategic plan, Article 16, and this article really comes at the behest and direction of the select board. And we're going to take a little bit of time, and Virginia's here, and we welcome her input this evening as well. This is a request to transfer $125,000 from free cash for to develop a community-based vision and strategic plan for the town. And this has not been done before in Chelmsford, but it's been done in other communities, and in fact, increasingly done in other communities. And in fact, our neighbors in Westford are out to bid right now, doing a strategic plan for their community. This is a different time, and you know, we, as John noted, you know, we sort of have been through, all of us have been through a period of low inflation, relatively stable markets, and so forth. Then we had the pandemic, and now we're in a period of increasing challenges, and increasing challenges in Chelmsford, I think, are important to us. You know, we're seeing the impacts of inflation, we're seeing the impacts of new labor contracts, we're seeing the request to MSBA for a new middle school, we're seeing the questions about sewer capacity. You know, should we be exploring new development for sewer capacity, either tying into the MWRA, looking at some plant to another or another community. We're looking at, you know, how do we renovate and expand the town's fire stations and fire staffing? How are we dealing with affordable housing in the community, MBTA zoning? We've got some major decisions before the community. And what the town doesn't have, and we've been struggling with for a couple of years, is what is the strategic plan and how we move forward? Because everybody's done a plan, right? The planning board did a master plan for zoning and development of the town. The schools have their school strategic plan and how they invest. We have an open space and recreation plan in the community. We have an age-friendly development plan. But at some point, we've got to pull it all together, and we need a facilitator and community input and a shared consensus on how to move forward. Because we can't do it all. We need to identify our priorities, have specific measurable items of what it is that we're going to do, and this takes about a year-long process. And we've done an expression of interest with developers who do this type of work, i.e. planners, professional consulting firms, who look at, you know, the planning components of a community, your demographics, how are you, you know, going forward, and getting buy-in in terms of what is the information, sharing it. Many of us sat in with when the schools did their shared vision, but now we need to do it as a whole of a community, and engage and get the input, do the analysis, put up some preliminary concepts out there, get the feedback, and then come forward with a specific plan. And not only have the plan, what's the plan for implementation? You know, what are the specific items that we're going to do to move ourselves forward in terms of what the community wants? Because that's been one of the things we're struggling with is, you know, we hear, you know, we're hearing the pushback. We heard it at this podium on Monday night, people pushing back already on the MBTA zoning. You know, do we want that? You know, how do we manage with that reality? How do we deal with sewer capacity? How much sewer capacity do we want? And what impact would that have on the development and characteristics of the community going forward, and so on and so forth? And so again, the idea of the plan is to guide policy development, prioritize the demands, and have specific items. So again, all those components come into it in terms of facilitating a community visioning process, and then coming up with a program that has specific policies, goals, and action items. I've given you a list in the next slide of the communities who have done this, and I know it's not an exhaustive list, of communities, and you can see they tend to be, all types of communities. There's Cape Cod communities, there's larger communities such as, your New Bedfords, and then there are communities more similar to Chelmsford, your Shrewsburys, and so forth, your Westboroughs, Westfords, and sort of, developing a plan to move forward in what's called a comprehensive plan, or in the case of Wellesley, they call it a unified plan. And then to give an example of like what is the output of this thing, on the next slide, it sort of shows you, and I know it's hard to read and you could probably blow it up, but the idea is you want, and this goes on for pages. I mean, this document is, but this section of the action items, you can see, it clearly articulates what the goals are, the strategies that are being implemented, what are the specific actions that are going to be sought going forward, when is this work going to be done, who's going to be responsible for it, is it a priority, and has it been programmed? So that's the type of a planning effort that we're seeking to bring forward to the community. And again, we welcome any questions you have. I don't know, Virginia, do you want to add anything that I passed over? But we're looking to this. If this gets funded at town meeting, again, we do undergo a procurement process in which we would invite proposals from consulting firms and they would submit their credentials, and we would evaluate them irrespective of price. So we don't want to just take the lowest bidder. You want to take the best qualified company. Then you get to the price part and make sure that their price for who you've chosen meets your budget. And then you start that process. And again, my guess is this is probably going to be the Chelmsford 2035 plan, because by the time this thing gets put into place, you're probably talking, beginning of 2025. And it's that 10-year blueprint of how the community would move forward. So I'll stop there and answer any questions that you may have.
This list that we're looking at,
Yeah.
where did that list come
This
from?
is an illustrative page. I took this from the town of Wellesley's unified plan.
Okay.
And again, the purpose of this is just to show you that it really, in order for this thing to be successful, you have to have specific action items.
Right.
It's not just, we value our open space and we want good quality schools. Well, what does that tell you? Who doesn't, what we really want to do is, what are we going to do? And then what are the priorities? Because we need to come together through the community and bring that plan, to the community, to town meeting and everything else, saying, this is what we're doing, this is why, and this is what we're not doing, and this is why. Because we're not going to be able to do it all. And especially in this environment going forward, where I think the challenges, not just for Chelmsford, or all of us are going forward. You're seeing the impacts of inflation, you're seeing the impacts of constraining revenue that is constraining not only the state, but it's also going to constrain the federal government. And therefore, we've sort of come out of this anomaly period of the last few years with the pandemic, where money was just flowing everywhere, and ARPA money and ENSAR money for the schools and everything else. And now you're seeing now you're starting to see that road is really coming to a crossroads in terms of how do you move forward effectively, because I think you're seeing at the federal level, wait a minute, what do we have for debt in this country? And more importantly, what we're seeing at the local level, and I was just at the chamber the other day with my colleagues, at a breakfast at the Inn and Conference Center. We all agreed to a person, the biggest challenge we have in our communities is infrastructure. We're seeing it right now with drainage. I could ask Christine, but she's been very busy tonight. But you won't believe the number of calls we've had on drainage. right? Yes, it's been an anomaly and an unprecedented rainy summer that we've never seen before, and probably, hopefully, in our lives we'll never see again. But it brought out to the surface the challenges that we have to deal with drainage and stormwater. Okay, that's just drainage and stormwater in terms of we now know, and we've got to do, drainage area studies, and we've talked about this with ARPA funding, and again, that's one of the reasons why I want Christine to give an overview at town meeting. We know that there's finite resources to meet these challenges, and that's just one of them. Then the other challenges is the sewer challenge, which we know about in terms of the plan that we have going forward in terms of, how do we deal with capacity? And then, the road issue that we talked about earlier. We have the paving list that we all acknowledge, is a tough hill to climb, and not to mention the sidewalk plan, which you didn't elaborate on tonight, which shows us a 30-year plan of investment needed for sidewalks and so forth to make them accessible and so forth, and then it goes from there. Your schools, fortunately, we as a town don't run the water utility. But we know the water districts are dealing with that same thing on how they're putting in $7 million treatment plants for PFAS and so forth. All that is in the road network, and we're seeing it. So again, that's just one component. Now you bring in the school improvement plan, you bring in, again, the age-friendly plan, you bring in other components of master plan. We need to basically have a community discussion with the stakeholders brought together with a facilitator, including the community, and then develop a plan going forward. Because otherwise, it shouldn't be first come, first serve, or the crisis of the day. It's got to be a coherent plan.
I totally agree with having a coherent, long-term, detailed plan. Who is going to be the person that's going to decide, who's going to be the driver of the decision-making tree? Because that's very important to me.
That's the process. In other words, what I envision, and again, we've had some. I'll turn it over to Virginia. No, but what I envision.
Because I think it should be. I'm sorry, but I think it should be professional.
It is. It is. That's why we need 125.
Well, I'm saying like the leader of the community, the town manager.
What I envision is there'll be.
What I'm saying.
What I envision, this is not going to be the 5 members of the select board leading a committee.
Thank you.
There will be. And we've discussed this, there will be a strategic plan committee which has to have the community stakeholders as the core steering group to go to that.
We should probably add some of that into this, but I just wanted to clarify when you asked, like, what is that? So if you look at, there's other example plans out there, Shrewsbury, for example, but if you look at kind of taking where do we want to be as a community and then parsing it down into the pragmatics, as Paul said, as to how does that map into specific critical success factors for the community, specific goals and specific action plannings, those would be set out over the time period of the plan, which is typically, 2-3 years in terms of those details. And so that then starts to set guideposts for the year-to-year planning, as opposed to kind of being reactionary of this is our crisis area now, so let's put a goal in place. To Paul's point, what we had envisioned and what we had reviewed with the select board when we went through this is that we would be putting a steering committee together. And that would include the town manager, it would include representation from major boards and committees, and it would include representation from major community stakeholders and major town stakeholders or department heads. And there's a process there where the steering committee may be smaller than the people that you bring in for different types of input. So for example, you would probably get input from all department heads. You'd have public input, you'd have public input from different boards and committees. And then you have a core steering committee. I think we had identified potentially like 10 or 12 people on that from across different boards, committees, town employees, and other community stakeholders. So it definitely is, in the end, owned by the town. It's not a select board plan, it's a town plan.
I just want to make sure
And it's
that the direction is led by when you say stakeholders, like the police chief, the fire chief.
Yes.
Those people who are professional in their positions, would be, I want that group of people to be the leaders and where the information is driven, not from, an elected board.
Absolutely.
Because I think
I
that's
think
why we have
it's-
the
it's a-
professionals.
It's a bit of a combination, because you also want major boards and committees involved. You want people from the planning
Well,
board
certainly, but
involved.
I think the major board should take the opinions of the professionals, is
Oh,
what I'm saying. I
absolutely.
think it should be professionally, if you're gonna do this,
And that's-
then it should, the derivative should be from those people who are professional in that
Yeah,
segment.
no argument. And that's also why you bring in an outside facilitator, because it would really be a conflict of interest for any person already affiliated with the town or a board or a committee to try to do this. You want somebody who's independent and has an independent set of ears and is really looking at the inputs objectively and putting them together and helping you with recommendations. So,
Paul, a question on this. How long will this process take?
At
And how much
least- at
time will
least-
it take away from people doing their jobs?
It's going to take at least a year. It's at least a year process. It's going to take a commitment of time and resources from the stakeholders, including the community, because myself, Evan Belansky, we can't tell the community, and we know what we suggest, well, how many additional housing units do you want, or affordable housing and those type of things, or those type of things. So, but it's going to take our time, and and the select board have recognized this and sort of their goals that they're developing for the board themselves and for me. But no, it is going to take at various points of time more or less of sort of a waning and waxing of time commitments depending upon which phase of the project that we're in. Some of the easy stuff we can provide. We have our plans in place, open space plan, master plan. We can pull all that stuff, demographics, but really where the time is going to be involved with is in the shaping of discussion of policies and community input and visioning and interviews and so forth. And that's going to take time, and I think that's why it's over a year process, because, we do realize that we have other responsibilities beyond this, that there's certain times that, that we may need to, downshift or accelerate. I can't be doing this in April when we're staring at town meeting. But I probably can do it in May once we're past town meeting, for if there's some things that are bigger for me, and vice versa with other stakeholders, because we do know there is a town period where you can engage people, and you're not going to engage them in August or July. So
Yeah.
we know, and again, it was mentioned earlier, I sat through the school strategic planning process, and that was well done. And so I know we can do that. I know it can be done, and I know that it took some attention from the superintendent and so forth in that instance, and it will take some of my time and attention as well as other department heads.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're nearing the end of our presentations this evening. The next one is Article 17. This is free cash to the stabilization fund. So again, if you go back to that schedule of that I laid out at the beginning in terms of the uses of free cash, this is the balance of free cash. The current the amount is $947,537. Again, which would. But what it will actually be, if some of these articles fail or get amended or something over time, it will be whatever is left, so that we can put the free cash into the stabilization fund at that time, whatever sort of arrives. That's why this article is placed at the end of the appropriation process for free cash. Again, we do have. In our stabilization fund, 13.7 million, as Darlene reported earlier. It's about 8.7% of our budget. As was noted, this is part of the process of the town's management, which enabled us to get the AAA bond rating, as well as our other investments such OPEB and debt management and so forth. And in fact, I can tell you, and I reported this to the select board on Monday night, our neighboring communities of Billerica and Tewksbury are out to bid right now, and they went through the bond rating process for their debt issuance, and they were not upgraded. So, I think it's telling that and you should take part of the credit for this, we are all working together, I think, in the right direction, again, as noted by our auditors and noted by the credit rating agencies. And so again, this would appropriate additional funds into our stabilization fund in an uncertain period where we may have to draw upon, funds, as stabilization suggests, in the future to bring us to, through the times that are uncertain ahead. So that's what would take place under this article. If there's no questions, we'll now move on to the Public Shade Tree Revolving Fund. And this is when we bring Christine back up to the podium, because she's also serves as our tree warden, in addition to being a facilities expert and
Is there
paving
anything she
expert.
doesn't do?
There's anything she doesn't do, exactly.
Is there anything she's not
her a
doing in
break.
town?
All right, thank you. So this is Article 18, and this is to create a public shade tree revolving fund. And so with the authorization from Director of Public Works, myself, to spend the fund, those receipts from payment pertaining to public shade tree removal. We would begin this in the fiscal year 24, and then in following years, in as far as amount of expenditures wouldn't exceed $30,000. Next slide, please. So if someone needs to remove a tree within the town's right-of-way, they need to come before me for approval. If it's in the right-of-way, if it's dead, I can deem it necessary that they don't necessarily need a tree hearing. If it is, and it questionably, I can ask for someone to submit an arborist report, or sometimes they're healthy and there's a need for it to be removed. In that case, it goes before a tree hearing. An example this past year was National Grid. They had many trees that were directly adjacent to some of their overhead wires. They do pruning, but there was some trees that they had recommended beyond that really couldn't be pruned. So they had provided a list of proposed removals. Per our bylaws, we require a 1-to-1 tree replacement, not necessarily in that place. We can locate it elsewhere in town. So last year, National Grid removed upwards of through a public tree hearing, it was 38 trees, and then there were additionally 50 trees that were decaying or dying. So that puts on the list 96 trees that we could plant. We did work with them we had a wonderful project installing 18 trees on the town common. That project went very well. Here's pictured our DPW staff along with Jim Martin on the tree committee planting a tree on the tree common. It was 18 trees. So what National Grid participated in that program and paying for the 18 trees. There's still more to replant. This public shade tree revolving fund wouldn't, I guess now I'm kind of having chasing the developer, in this case National Grid, to do the replanting or to coordinate the replanting. This public shade tree revolving fund would allow us to obtain some fees up front, put that into the account, and then we would still go about the process of planting trees, but not having, because so we are planting some small amount of trees this fall, a larger amount in the spring. I'm going to have to coordinate that and say, okay, you still owe us X amount of trees, here's the list, you got to pay it, and they have to coordinate that. So this would help streamline that process. And right now we're proposing $600 a tree. That's estimated based on us purchasing the tree, the loam, mulch, and also some of the fencing around it. And we, DPW, have been installing these trees. I don't know if there's any questions on this fund. And other towns, or I know the city of Lowell has a similar fund, so there are some other examples where other towns have maybe not used it as much, but have at least the structure set up in their government. Thank you.
Okay, I have 3 quick articles to wrap up this evening. The next one is Article 24.
I'll be there in a second.
We've got time. This is an easy one to explain. What we're seeking here is to delete a section of the town's bylaws pertaining to utility poles. The language there basically was adopted a generation ago, allowed the select board to call a public hearing and basically hold the utilities accountable to remove double poles after a 180-day period. The board initiated that process a few months ago, and we're still meeting with National Grid. But National Grid quickly pointed out under the recently enacted state laws that the town no longer has that authority to compel the utilities. That was reviewed by Town Council Paul Haverty. He agreed with the analysis, and basically the request here is let's pull this off the books, because by leaving it there, it creates confusion, because what's going to happen is a year or two, whatever from now, somebody's going to come in and say, why isn't the select board, exercising its rights to take action against the utilities for double pole removal? So that's what this request is to rescind the section of the bylaw that is not enforceable and applicable, and so that's what we're doing here. And we've had to do this over time with either court rulings or state law, when bylaws cannot continue to be enforced. The most recent one that comes to my mind was the one on political signs. Mm-hmm. We used to have a bylaw that says you couldn't erect political signs until 21 days before an election. And then the Supreme Court said, oh, no, that's free speech. Mm-hmm. You can put up a sign anytime you want. So we had to go back and amend that bylaw. And in this case, we don't have the authority under recently enacted state law to compel utilities to remove double poles, which probably explains why you see so many double poles, not only in Chelmsford, but in other towns. So that's what we're seeking here, is to rescind the section of the bylaw pertaining to that. Okay, if there's no questions, we'll go to the final 2 articles on the warrant, 26 and 27. 26 is to acquire a permanent easement at 9 Acton Road. You can see it's an 8-foot wide easement that runs basically from Acton Road. That's the site, you remember where the old bowling alley was, across from the park, behind the gas station. You see it's all cleared now. There's some construction going on. As part of the planning board's approval for that, they have the foresight of allowing for, and I guess Anita knows better than I do since she was part of that, but they have the process of allowing for a 8-foot wide easement, so that in the future, as that gets built and other activity goes on in the center, we'll be able to provide a corridor from residents to get from Acton Road, to the Brook Walk and the Brook area back there. So, and in fact, this plan has not only been approved by the planning board, it's actually been recorded at the Registry of Deeds, but state law requires that the town accept an easement by vote of town meeting. So even though it's been, again, approved by the planning board as a condition of the project and been recorded, we need town meeting to accept the easements, which is why this, again, is a ministerial item that would fall under the consent agenda.
So I happen to live behind
Yep.
there, up in
Yeah.
Grist
Yeah,
Mill.
hearing about her.
Well, we are, and it's
Yeah.
interesting that we hadn't heard about this until I actually opened up the article booklet. So right now, we're building a path to nowhere that's ending at the brook. So is there going to be any protection there? I mean, the neighborhood that's going in behind there, behind the brook, there's going to be kids there. They're going to be riding their bikes. I happen to know with all the rain and fallen trees in the brook, it's very, very dangerous. So I can see kids, that looks like a fun path to me, riding up and down. What's going to prevent them from number one, okay, so this is like phase one, right? And then,
Very good.
so prevent them from going in the brook? Like, is there going to be some sort of safety?
That's a very good question. And what I will point out is, this is just providing the town with the easement. I don't envision, and this was discussed, in fact, before I was in this meeting tonight,
Yeah.
I was over at the Center Village Master Plan Committee meeting, and Evan Belansky was on remote by Zoom, and we were discussing this with them. Just for that concern is we don't envision there's gonna be any pavement put down, and quite frankly, I don't think that it will be a clear identified easement like the brook walk that you're seeing behind Oddfellows. What basically this is doing is this is providing that ability in the future, if other activities can be advanced by the town in conjunction with the property owners, to provide a manageable and safe, pathway.
Yeah.
If it doesn't happen, I don't envision that you're gonna see anything happen at all. But but I think the planning board wanted to at least provide that, initial step to what could be a future step. I don't know, Anita, if you recall that, or you want to, I think
This was
you were on that project, right? With the planning board.
Not at 9 Acton Road. that was
Okay, you weren't at
before
9
me.
Acton
Yeah,
Road, 'cause before you, yeah.
But basically, this is to give us the access for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't
We're
envision.
not putting in, there's nothing being.
I don't
built
think
there.
something's gonna be
Right.
put in, but I think and it was discussed, as I said earlier, with the Center Village Committee, if over time, as, if there's a coordinated effort with stakeholders and butters input, that there can either, be something that either connects it to the parking lots or areas back there to allow it. That's what this was, to do it, because if you don't have that right to cross the land, then it will be very hard to get at a later date. This was the opportunity when the project was being
Securing
proposed.
the right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're securing the right.
No, and that's fine. I mean, we're already concerned about that phase two.
Yeah.
Whether that's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years from now. I
Wow.
mean, we are concerned about privacy issues. Of course, there's people that go back and forth there. They're looking in our windows. We find trash behind there. People are trying to get into the building. And then if there is, because 9 Acton Road, the parking is already so constrained in that development, we're concerned that folks are going to park over in front of Gristmill condominiums, walk along the pathway and down into their friends or family's neighborhood, increasing the traffic, increasing the wear and tear on our common areas and things like that. So there's a number of serious considerations about accessing the back of our building. Security and privacy are two of the top ones.
Okay, that's something I think we should try to pick up after town meeting and
Sure.
really start getting people to the table. And thank you for bringing that, because I wasn't
Of course.
aware of this. Thank you.
Yeah, people have actually, so where my unit is the back door, and people will actually like try to get into the building. They'll actually pull on the door. And it's pretty scary when you hear that at 11 o'clock at
Oh,
night.
yeah.
So
Wow.
increasing people back there will increase the probability of those types of things happening. Increase the trash, increase, those types of things, mischief and mayhem
Okay.
in our neighborhood.
So this is ministerial, Paul. This has already been provided in the plans requirement. It sets the right but does not create a path that currently, it's already recorded at the Registry of Deeds. What happens if it's not accepted at town meeting?
It's already recorded. It's already part of the planning
Yeah.
board approval. I would have to check with council, but I would expect that if it wasn't, then the town couldn't do anything until town meeting accepts the easement. Yeah, I don't know.
Essentially, wouldn't
I
be
don't know
able
if
to
there's a
do
time
anything with
limit.
it, but it's
Right.
it's recorded easement.
Right.
And, I mean, there is recent case law that says that a town can lose access to an easement.
Right.
However, it's very unlikely.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, and then the final article, a little easier to deal with, this is a sewer and drainage easement off of Old Farm Way. And I'm going to, again, turn the podium over to Christine Clancy, because she's very familiar with this roadway. And really, this is an effort where, I was out there this summer with Christine, with Tony Rapucci, our town engineer. This is a case where, it's almost similar to what you're describing, is we received a concern from a property owner who abutted the current access at Old Farm Way that was constructed as a fire access road. And here we are a generation later, you know, it's in tough shape. The same thing, people are going through the property, and we basically met out there and we formulated the plan with the input of the fire chief, police chief, you know, public works, and on securing a sewage and drainage easement, but eliminating a troublesome corridor. So I'll ask Christine to sort of give you more details.
Thank you. So at the end of Old Farm Way, which is a cul-de-sac, there is continues, it almost looks like a driveway, and then it continues a path that connects to Graniteville Road. And when we had our site visit, you can see that the path was used, especially kids probably in the neighborhood going to Parker School or adjacent schools. And so the request, I think, originally was, could this area be paved, thinking it was an extension of the roadway. So we looked into it, and that area was, when the development was developed about 30 years ago, that remains as a common area. So that is not within the town's right-of-way. That is a common area. And actually in that original planning board decision, or when the subdivision was built out, that was supposed to be fire access. And there's a gate on the Graniteville side. So we did coordinate with Chief Ryan, Fire Department, and confirm that do you still see this as a need for fire access? And he reviewed it. It's not really passable. It's just a small paved area that continues into a path. So confirming that we do not need to maintain that for fire access. But when we looked at it, we did see that there's existing sewer and drain infrastructure that comes down Old Farm Way connecting to Graniteville. And we do need access for that infrastructure. So this proposal, this easement, is just purely to maintain access for the sewer and drain, the infrastructure that goes between that cul-de-sac and connecting to Graniteville Road. As far as any other rights of access or ownership of the parcel in terms of the paving of the roadway extension or driveway, kind of looks like a driveway, or the path, that would be the responsibility of the subdivision, the unit, the owners of the buildings. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're at the end. All right. Okay. Next on our agenda is a discussion of the future meetings, invitations to article proponents and interested parties, and the timeline for Finance Committee warrant book production. So, given that a lot of these warrant articles have already been reviewed this evening, there's really only 3 articles that are left on the warrant that need to be reviewed. They're the 2 zoning articles, one of which is a citizen petition, and then there's the article from the Sustainability Committee. Yeah, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. Is it a carbon copy of what was presented in the spring? Okay.
Yeah, it's the same article, and the zoning article from the planning board is a rather ministerial zoning article. It's really allowed use for adult daycare. So you really have the 2 one that, and I've reached out to the citizen petition article trying to schedule them for the select board, and I have not received a response. And I hope you have, because
I haven't reached out yet, but yeah.
But try, because I've reached out twice. I sent a follow-up message today.
Okay.
And why I mentioned that is because Evan Belansky's also needs to get them before the planning board, because the planning board has to make a recommendation on the citizen petition article. And thus far, he's not received any response either. So I just want to give you a sort of a heads up to try to get to him perhaps tomorrow and see if he can get to your meeting next Thursday, because I need him the following Monday, and then he needs to be the following Wednesday to the planning board. And thus far, I have not received any response, and Evan hasn't either.
So actually, given the fact that there is an MBTA meeting next Thursday with the planning board, where they're reviewing was it UPS and Riverneck Road for the MBTA community, it may make more sense to give ourselves a couple of weeks. I know that the planning board for their article is not available next Thursday unless we held an earlier meeting. It may make more sense to have those 3 articles come in the following Thursday, not hold a meeting next week, and proceed to our review and voting right after those quick hopefully quick presentations. I don't know what everybody else feels.
That sounds okay.
So we'll hold off on having a meeting next week, and we'll just have a meeting the following week, and then we'll plan to vote that evening. We'll start at 6:30, which has been our new normal time, which is our COVID in place time. I know we used to start at 7:30 prior to that, but I think the 6:30 work for everybody on that following week.
6:30?
6:30, yeah,
28th.
on the 28th. Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
Okay. All right. Well, let's plan on 6:30 on that Thursday.
Stay awake longer. I'll stay awake longer.
Maybe. All right, perfect. So the timeline for the warrant book production then, Pam, I don't have it right in front of me at this moment.
I have it right here.
You do, excellent.
Hold on, give me 1 second. Just had it.
Yeah, I had it at one point and then disappeared.
Right here.
Oh, I've got it. All right, so that puts us at having the last day for recommendations being the 28th, so that fits with our schedule. And then there'll be a copy of the book for review. We'll get the final inputs. We'll get the letter in, and have the book delivered by October 4th for the printer for post on the webpage. And then town meeting starts on the 16th. And Paul, we're envisioning at least 2 nights, obviously, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah. We're hoping we'll stay at 2 nights. We'll see.
You never know.
You never know. All right. Is there any public comment? Seeing none. I'm seeing none in Zoom. Oh.
Can I make a motion to adjourn?
Excuse me.
No press questions. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. See you guys in 2 weeks.